Imagine spending your entire life stuck in a hospital bed, dreaming about nothing more than a quiet, normal life. Then you die and wake up in another world. Sounds great, right? Except this world is full of monsters, survival is brutal, and the only advantage he has is a few bonus skills he basically negotiated from a goddess. But just when things start getting dangerous in the forest, he runs into the most unexpected ally possible. A beer fairy. Let's see how it all went. The story begins with a man with a serious expression, saying that if she doesn't do as he asks, then he refuses to be reborn. He was in ghost form, next to his body lying on a hospital bed, and the confused girl, Spirit, agreed to his condition. A couple of minutes ago, he asked in surprise, "Rebirth in another world, is that serious?" She agreed and said that he should rejoice, because during this summoning, the choice fell on him. He thought his name was Yuri Isari. After a long illness, he ended his life at the age of 37. This was supposed to happen, but for some reason, an entity calling itself a goddess offered him rebirth in another world. He asked, in short, that she periodically sends chosen ones to other worlds to settle there, and grants them various abilities for this, right? She said that she enjoys dealing with those who understand everything quickly. He asked if he could choose his abilities himself. She agreed, and asked if he wanted to become an invincible hero or gain the skill of charm to collect a harem. He refused and said that, in fact, he had always dreamed of a quiet life in nature. So, can he get something for everyday life, not for war? She agreed and thought she got off easy. However, when the list of his demands exceeded 10, she began to get nervous. She finished listening to his demands with a surprised look and asked if he was asking too much. However, the test showed that he was not a villain. So be it. She would give him everything he wished for and a little strength to survive. He was glad about this, went towards the light, and thought that this was how his second life, full of hope, began. Sometime later, in the new world, he was running away from a large boar and loudly asked, "What is this? Where did this huge boar come from?" It was the size of an SUV. He thought that starting a new life only to end it here was not funny at all. He needed to somehow reach the abandoned village the goddess had spoken of. He remembered something, turned around sharply, and thought with a self-confident smile that he had the right skill, invisibility, with which he realized something, continued to run quickly, and asked loudly how to even activate this skill. He closed his eyes in fear and thought that it should work. Invisibility. Activation of the skill began to take effect. He noticed this, hid in the bushes, and the boar lost sight of him because of it. He thought with surprise that it had happened. He had lost sight of him. So that's how it works. It was as if he had completely merged with the landscape. It was time to escape from here. After some time, he hid in the forest, breathing heavily from fatigue, and said that it was really scary. It's good that he now has a healthy body. He looked at his reflection in a puddle and said that, by the way, he had become noticeably younger. He looked like an ordinary elementary school student. He needs to figure everything out. Stories like this usually have a status window. Maybe like this. He raised his hands and a system window appeared in front of him. It surprised him, and he said that it was incredible. It was just like a video game. He noticed that his last name was now Sarai, and he said that the goddess had even made a mistake in his last name, and now he was 7 years old. From the goddess's point of view, it should be within the margin of error. He'll check what's going on with the skills he's received. He saw a lot of different skills from level 1 to level 5, and said that everything is in place. As they say, impudence is second happiness. With such an arsenal, he'll survive even without electricity. He wants to try everything at once, but if he attracts the attention of monsters, he's finished. He needs to practice when he gets to a safe place. For now, he'll move invisibly, but if he runs into someone big again, there are situations where running won't save him. He definitely needs a strategy. His magic doesn't specialize in combat. It's useless against monsters like that boar. His only weapon is a working cleaver. If he doesn't think through his plan down to the last detail, this journey will be his last. His stomach growled. He looked at what was in his bag and said that he only had a handful of hazelnuts. That's not enough. Master magic. Protect himself from wild animals, find food, and also find a safe place to spend the night. Isn't that too many tasks for one day? The path to a peaceful life in nature turned out to be much more thorny than he thought. After some time, he saw buildings along the way and asked, "Is this the village?" He entered the village, looked around, and said that there is land for farming here. There are no people, which means there will be no extra problems either. The main thing is that there is a place to hide. Of course, everything is as he wanted. The goddess did not deceive. However, the buildings are very dilapidated. Apparently, people left this place a long time ago. He needs to inspect everything here. The minimum program: clothing, food, and shelter. He had enough clothes, but he needed to get the rest before sunset. He ran through the village and caught the eye of a house that was more or less intact. He went inside and said the walls were strong, but a little repair was all it took to make it habitable. The house was right in the center, convenient for both defense and expansion. The housing issue was solved, and he only had food left. He wouldn't last long without hunting. However, he found potatoes and wheat nearby, and said the crops had run wild, but they survived. If he tidied up the field, there would be a real harvest. Wait, is this even edible? What if it's poisonous? He remembered something, opened the system window, and said he had a rating. He used the skill on the potatoes and wheat, and the system reported that it was edible, suitable for digestion. He found this skill very useful and said that, however, if he planted it right away, there would be almost no food left. There was also some old wheat in the bins. He doesn't know how long it's been gathering dust here, and he doesn't want to risk his health. He once saw a video of birds being caught with grain. Maybe the local birds will bite? He peered over the fence, saw the birds pecking at the grain, and thought that if he baited them first, they would crawl into the snares themselves. Right, he completely forgot. He did have fire magic, albeit rather weak. However, killing a bird with a spell would be much easier. Suddenly, he heard someone warn him of danger, began to nervously look around, and asked where it came from, where the danger was. He looked around and noticed a huge boar breathing loudly and staring intently at him. He became alarmed by what he saw and asked loudly if he had really tracked it by scent. The protagonist jumped aside and dodged the boar's attack. He used the invisibility skill, hid in cover, and thought he almost got caught. What should he do? Run again? He heard loud noises, looked out, and said in surprise that it was simply smashing houses. He loudly asked it to stop, and thought that if he ran away now, he would destroy everything here. He would simply have nowhere to live. If he went out, would he be able to stop it? With the minimal force he was given, even an ordinary boar, it's scary. And this monster was a real tank. He was nothing compared to it. Would he really have to abandon this village? He couldn't give up so quickly. It was dangerous to wander around this world without looking back, and there was no guarantee that where he ran, there would be a better place. Besides, the boar would pursue him even if he escaped. He probably perceived him as an intruder, invading his territory. This meant he would have to fight back. They were both in the same position, rivals fighting for a place in the sun. He had always dreamed of a free life in nature, but it was impossible without confronting nature. Besides, living freely means taking responsibility for himself. He must sort out his own problems. He emerged from behind cover and said that he had decided to live in this world and not back down at the first obstacle. He used first-level fire magic, attacked a large boar, and unexpectedly, a very powerful explosion occurred. He said with an arrogant smile that this is roughly how it would look if he found himself in a typical isekai action movie. He continued to watch from behind cover and thought that, in fact, his body had frozen with fear and he had simply hidden. In fact, his powers were only the bare minimum. With such a set, he was hardly capable, although this magic was bestowed upon him by a goddess. Maybe it was more effective than it seemed? After all, the effectiveness of the invisibility skill turned out to be quite high. When it is activated, even a boar with its excellent sense of smell cannot smell it. He needs to trust this power and believe in himself, that he can bring the fantasies of all sofa heroes to life. He felt a warmth building in his chest. He could handle it. He raised his hand with a confident air and began casting first-level fire magic. A very small flame erupted from his hand, fell to the ground, and immediately went out. He became worried about what had happened, and asked, "Is that all? This couldn't be true. It probably just didn't work because he was trying it for the first time." The boar approached him and breathed angrily. He became very frightened by this and loudly said that he had been noticed and needed to try something else. He started using various first-level magic, but it had no effect on this beast. He started running away from the angry boar and said loudly that he needed a different plan. He turned around and used third-level earth magic and created a large wall of earth, and it seemed to him that this way he could stop it a little. The monster was immediately able to break this wall with its large head, which surprised him very much. However, the monster was stuck in the gap, and he realized that this was his chance. He took out his knife and said that if magic doesn't work, there's still the good old method. He thought that he needs to hit where hunters and slaughterers aim, the throat. Now he can just reach it. There will be no other chance. He's scared. Will he be able to do it with his trembling hands? If he misses, then it's the end for him. And yet he decided to live in this world no matter what. He was able to defeat this monster, prayed, and said that he didn't expect it to end so quickly. What should he do with this carcass now? He seemed to have read in some book about butchering carcasses. He remembered that the animal had to be hung, bled, and dipped in water to cool. He couldn't do it. He couldn't lift the carcass. And besides, it would take a whole river to cool it. He heard someone ask if he needed help. This caught his attention, and he said that it was the same voice that had warned him about the boar. He had to show himself immediately. A bird flying above him said that they were here, above. They flew up to him and said that this was the first time they had seen a person understand their language. He saw the language skill at maximum level and asked, was this the skill that made it possible? He thought it was necessary for communicating with people in this world, but it turned out that it even allowed him to understand animals. He couldn't talk to the boar, probably because they were enemies. However, next time, maybe he could try talking before the hunt. Although, if the animal started screaming that it was in pain, hunting would become very difficult. One of the birds asked if he should show him where the river was. He thought it was strange, but agreed and said it would be very useful. The birds flew off to the side and said that a fairly large river was over there, very close. MC thanked them for their help and said he would remember it. By the way, Why were they helping him? They thanked him for the food and said that it was a little old but tasty. They liked it. He asked, so was this gratitude for that handful of wheat? The birds said goodbye to him, began to fly away. He thanked them and thought it was good that he didn't hunt them. He tried to move the boar's body and asked if the river was nearby, but how was he supposed to get it there? After all, he had asked for a function for transferring objects. Like in games, he saw in the system window that the storage skill needed to be touched and the icon activated. He activated this skill and the boar's body rose in a large bubble and moved to its storage. He looked at his inventory and said that this was another dimension where time stood still so the meat wouldn't rot. Such a large carcass took up very little space. This was pure cheating, but he liked it. His spirits were even lifted. He needed to hurry to the river. He needed to activate the invisibility skill. Just in case. He reached the river and thought that he had already bled on the shore. He decided that since it was liquid, magic and water would help. He washed everything away with a powerful stream. Somehow he gutted the prey and immersed it in running water. Then he sat down on the ground and asked if he was very tired, maybe because of mana consumption. By the way, he could see the status. In the status window, he saw that magic was 51 points out of 100. Health 80 points out of 100. He read this and thought that he didn't know whether this was a lot or a little, but the numbers seemed small. If even with such stats he was able to defeat this monster, then that boar was really weak. He was deeply mistaken in his assessments. The indicators he thought were low, especially mana, already seemed to be exceeding the norm. The beast he killed was a forest boss, which not every warrior could handle. However, bleeding the carcass with water magic required delicate control. He already possessed incredible strength, but he would not know this for a long time. After some time, he returned to the village and said that there was already meat for dinner. An assessment confirmed that there were no infections or parasites. He used earthbending to create a makeshift stove. It wasn't very good, but it was enough. He used firebending to ignite the kindling he placed in the stove. It's a camper's golden rule not to light an open fire on the ground to avoid damaging the soil. He finished roasting the meat, looked at it in amazement, and said that after the food from the hospital, he had real meat, which he hadn't seen in a very long time. He started eating and thought that as soon as he killed the boar, he immediately decided that this would be his first proper dinner in this world. All this time, he ignored his hunger, saved potatoes and grain, and finally, a true masterpiece. The thrill of the hunt and eating in the fresh air, how delicious will it be? He took a small bite and said very loudly that it was very tasty. He started to cry and said that there was no smell of the animal. The meat was tender and moderately fatty. With each bite, the flavor revealed itself more and more. You could feel the very power of nature. No spices, just over a fire. But it was so delicious. Seriously, he had never eaten anything like this in his life. Finally, he felt alive. Ever since he came here, everything had been in a fog. But now he felt the taste of life with every cell. When Yuri finished eating, he stood up and said that the issue with provisions for the first time was solved. Now they needed to arrange a shelter for the night before it got dark. He started drawing on the ground with a stick and said that to prevent monsters from eating him in his sleep, or bandits from attacking him, they would do it like this. That would be his plan. Exactly. He stood next to the house and thought that there were many ways to build a wall. Maybe he should dismantle the old abandoned house and build a wooden fence. No, that would take too long, and he didn't have the tools or nails to make it truly strong. Stacking stones, like in a real fortress, that would also be a bad option because it would take a lot of time. In the end, there was only one way left. It seemed like the fastest way would be to use earth magic. However, he was still worried that a boar had punched right through that previous barrier. However, if he removed small stones and debris from the soil, the strength should increase. It would take a little practice. He started practicing and managed to make a smooth mug, and he said that while the first sample looked terrible, the last one came out with a perfectly smooth surface and was as hard as real stone. It turns out that such density can be achieved without firing. This isn't just ceramics anymore, but some kind of magically created monolith. It's like pottery. The most important thing is preparing the clay. Preliminary processing is everything. Using magic, he loosened the soil, removed all the roots and stones, and thoroughly kneaded the mixture. It needs to be carefully shaped. He began using magic and created a smooth wall, and he said he was delighted with this magnificent wall. About 5 meters long, 3 meters high, and half a meter thick. Breaking through such a wall won't be easy. Now he needs to build 3 more of the same to completely surround the house. He finished building the walls with which he surrounded his house and said that this was his fortress. He looked around, felt sad, and wondered if this was a prison. He didn't have enough mana to make a door. He'd have to wait for it to regenerate. If he needed to leave, he'd simply dissolve part of the wall. It was already getting dark. Time to finish for today. There was still one more urgent matter left: drinking water. He was so engrossed in the construction that he completely forgot about this, although he should have taken care of the water first. However, he had an idea. When he was exploring the village, he noticed a well. If he was a worker, he wouldn't have to run to the river every time. Besides drinking water, he needed regular water as well. He opened the well and said that the bottom was deep. It wasn't immediately clear if there was anything there. He needed to throw a stone to check. He threw the stone in, heard it hit the water, and asked, however, how he could get water. The old crane was broken and he had no bucket. Magic would help him again, although he didn't want to waste any more energy today. He imagined the water rising and hovering in the air. He managed to get water from the well and said that it was quite clean. Even the assessment confirmed this, but just in case, he should still boil it. He sat by the stove, looking tired, and said that the first day had been too eventful. It was still early, but it was time to sleep. He hasn't cleaned the house yet, and there's no bedding, so we had to make a temporary bed out of leaves. There are renovations ahead, finishing the fence, securing the garden, and the toilet issue still needs to be sorted out somehow. He has a lot to do, but it's so wonderful. Now he can build whatever he wants. The plans are so numerous, his fingers are itching. He hasn't looked forward to tomorrow so much in a long time. The next morning, he stood up with a disgruntled expression and said it was very cold here, and his whole body ached. The layer of leaves clearly wasn't enough. They didn't protect him from either the cruelty or the dampness of the earth. The plan for today is crystal clear. He needs to build a bed out of boar hide. After all, sound sleep is the foundation of life. It's easy to say, but difficult to do. Can an amateur handle leather tanning? He should look for the answer in his skills. He found it. And here it is, the unique skill. Guide to Country Life. Such abilities are a rare gift, bestowed only on the reborn. The status window also falls into this category. The guide, judging by the name, should contain all the wisdom of the village. That's quite a generous bonus. I wonder if the system will provide the necessary information upon request. Time to get started. Boar hide tanning. Skinning. The first step is removing the skin. Step 2, cleaning off any impurities. Step 3, removing subcutaneous fat with a knife. Seems simple, but what next? Step 4, to prevent spoilage, soak the skin in a tanning solution for 1 or 2 weeks. The recipe for the composition: water, alum, and salt. The protagonist gave up after reading this and said he'd just throw more leaves on the ground for now. It's better to focus his energy on something else. For example, cleaning and renovating the house. The house is 1 story, with only 3 rooms. Bare earth replaces the floor everywhere, and not a single tool. He found a stove in the house, and said that means there will be a kitchen here, and the room opposite will be a dining room. The far room will become a bedroom or a hall. Now everything is clear. Apparently, the previous residents slept on some kind of mats, but he, accustomed to beds, feels extremely uncomfortable here. His mana was fully restored overnight. It's time to get busy with home improvement. He used earth magic, which he understood best, and rebuilt the house, raising it onto the foundation. He said the surface became smooth as concrete, which was much nicer than the dusty earth. However, the rooms immediately became cooler. Near the stove, he preserved a plot of earth in the traditional Japanese style. Earth magic also proved indispensable when repairing walls and creating utensils. He achieved a mastery in this element rare for an ordinary person, although he himself did not even realize it. Following the renovation, a major cleaning began. He didn't have a mop, so he tried blowing out the debris with wind magic. After a while, he looked at the clean house with a satisfied smile and said that, by the way, it turned out quite decent. It's getting dark, time to finish. Tomorrow he'll try making a candle from animal fat. Although wait, he also needs a bath. He also needs to figure out something about the toilet. For now, he just uses leaves and buries the waste in the ground. The next day, he began to cry, prompted by the status window, which he decided to examine in more detail. The list of stored items indicated that he had a dry ration, a flask, a cold-resistant skin, a potion of mana and health, a letter, and trophies from a magical wild boar. He said in a very depressed voice that he had food, water, and warm fur from the very beginning. However, an even greater shock came from the letter written by the goddess herself. The message mentioned the name of this world, Foa. She also advised hiding his unique skills and appraisal from the locals. The goddess left behind many more thoughtful instructions. However, it wasn't this that shocked him, but the detailed description of everyday magic. This skill included a whole bunch of useful spells. Later, he began cooking meat and said in a dissatisfied tone that it seemed like he'd been wasting his time on nonsense. It had been the same in his past life. He was constantly skimming through introductions and tutorials, and then marveling at features he didn't know about. Although he is cautious by nature, he can sometimes be very inattentive. MC finished eating and said that fried meat without seasoning is already too much to swallow. I wonder if the village still has salt from the previous owners? He should go and search the abandoned houses. If the goddess is so generous, she could have given him some spices too. He began to examine the house and found a map there. He looked at it and said that he was glad that the map survived and did not crumble to dust, but it was drawn so poorly that almost nothing could be made out. This strange mark haunts him. Is this a dangerous zone, or maybe a deposit of valuable resources? He needs to go scout out the situation. He went to the place marked on the map and said that he should stop guessing. It's time to see everything for himself. There must be a reason why a settlement was once founded here. What if he stumbles upon some hidden treasure? Although money is absolutely useless in his current situation. In any case, he won't know the truth until he sees it with his own eyes. He saw very tall grass and said that, judging by the lack of tall trees, there definitely used to be a road here. Apparently, it was abandoned long ago, which is why everything around is overgrown with wild weeds. He really doesn't want to push through this thorny thicket. What if poisonous weeds or some kind of mutated ticks are lurking there? It looks like he'll have to admit defeat and turn back. He has magic now. After all, he still can't get used to the idea of being a sorcerer. He has no use for a forest fire, so he'll do without fire techniques. It's time for wind magic. He'll call it Wind Cutter. He released a stream of wind in front of him, which cut through all this grass, and said that, just in case, he'll scan the area for poisons. The system notified him that the yopa, a perennial forest plant and a local analog of the small-leaved lily, its young shoots and bulbs were edible. He began examining them and said there were whole deposits of them here. Now his diet will be much more varied. Wait, aren't those leaves from a tuber? Could this really be the legendary wild yam? Apparently, the properties of the flora here are almost identical to the old world, so he found an isekai version of the mountain yam. For him, it's more valuable than any treasure now. Real yam takes decades to grow, and digging it up is quite problematic. Its deep roots are terribly fragile and break with any wrong move. Moreover, the intertwined neighboring roots make it difficult to get to it without much effort. However, he does have magic in his arsenal. By manipulating the earth, he can get it without any extra effort. He pulled something out of the ground and asked, confused, "What the hell was that?" It didn't look like a monster, but it looked pretty weird, although it felt like a regular root vegetable. Maybe it accidentally turned into something like that radish from the meme? He put it in his inventory and said that he would examine this trophy a little later. His detection skill activated. He started looking around and thought that something was wrong here. A cold sweat literally broke out in him from a bad feeling. He can't stay here for even a second. He needs to get out of here immediately. He jumped back, saw 2 large footprints on the ground and asked, worriedly, what was that? Was it another monster or an attack by the locals? He turned around and saw a huge praying mantis standing next to him and looking at him. He became worried about this and wondered if it was a huge praying mantis that could turn invisible. Would he really have to fight such an enemy again? What if we can come to an agreement, like with those birds? He greeted him and asked, how about just pretending they hadn't met? He wasn't going to be hostile to him at all. The monster struck him with a very strong blow with its paw, but he noticed it and immediately jumped back. He said that things were bad. He couldn't negotiate with him. The monster became invisible again, and he said that one attack from him and he would be finished. He managed to dodge the monster's attack again, and he said that apparently the detection skill was helping him a lot. The system notified that detection was a passive ability that tracked any movement within its radius. He thought that he had only just now realized its true nature, but if he could use it correctly. He began to look closely, saw the silhouette of a mantis, and said that, unlike his invisibility, it only concealed the body, but not the presence. He began to use water magic and with a serious expression said that now it was his turn. Water magic isn't just about controlling liquids. Its true power is creating water from the moisture in the air. He read about this in the goddess's letter. He bound the monster with water and said it would hurt, but it asked for it. Simply killing it would be a waste of resources. In that case, its carcass should be used for materials. The sides would be useful for crafting weapons or tools. To do that, he needed to defeat it without inflicting damage. He saw several worms crawling out of the praying mantis's body and loudly asked, is this a hairworm parasite from another world? The system reported that it was a parasitic worm that uses praying mantises as hosts. During breeding season, it drives its host to water and forces them to drown so it can return to its natural habitat. Yuri looked at it in horror and asked, it can't parasitize a person, can it? He found it disgusting and cut it into pieces, making the mantis useless as a trophy. After that, he walked through the forest, looking around, and said that it must be somewhere nearby. Because of the monotonous landscape, he begins to lose his bearings. He found a cave and said that this is the very place marked on the map. He looked inside, but it was very dark, and he said that he would create a shaft with earth magic, wrap it in boar skin, and a makeshift torch is ready. He went inside and said that it was obvious that this cave was cut by people, but he saw no traces of any ore. What was there ahead? He should walk as far as he could. It was not very comfortable to walk on such a surface. I wonder if he could make himself new shoes, or would he have to buy them in the city? However, he has no money, so maybe bartering will save him. He hopes to get at least something from selling the materials he has mined. He would love to stumble upon some real treasures here. He noticed a bright large crystal, was surprised by what he saw, and said that he said it was a giant stalactite, illuminated by rays of light. Such a sight. This is already a real treasure. After some time, he returned home, ate meat with a joyful look, and said that it was not a stone but a huge lump of salt. Finally, a steak with salt. It is very tasty. His peaceful life in another world is starting to improve. He remembered the monsters he met and wondered if this was really the same peaceful life. It feels like he has taken a wrong turn. Right, it's time for a classic everyday genre. He will start farming. The basis of any farming endeavor is proper soil preparation. 18% preparation, 20% work. In any business, the foundation is laid precisely at this stage. If the previous owners grew anything here, the land should be suitable. but it's abandoned, so it's hard as stone. To revive the field, he first needs to pull out the weeds. Earth magic makes this very easy. After removing the weeds, he needs to plow the land. If you aerate the soil and loosen it, the result will exceed all expectations. Earth magic helped him get the job done quickly. He made a hoe just in case, but it wasn't needed. He'll dig at least one bed by hand. He finished preparing it and said it already looked like a real vegetable garden. Now he needs fertilizer. Horse or cow manure is usually used, as well as bird droppings. In his current conditions, obtaining all of this is practically impossible. He didn't know what to do. But at that moment, the birds he had encountered earlier flew to him and called him. He imagined how weird it would be if he asked them to poop right here, and said that it was a strange idea. They asked if he was even in his right mind. Maybe he was sick? The protagonist denied it and said that he was completely fine. By the way, they never introduced themselves to each other. He introduced himself and asked what their names were. They looked at him and asked what names were. He was surprised by this and said that a name is what each individual creature is called. They did not understand him, and he thought that apparently the concept of a personal name was completely foreign to birds. He asked them to call him by name and thought that having conversation partners was already a plus. However, he didn't really want to. What if they turned out to be annoying? After some time, he threw a lot of grass into the hole, and the birds looked at it and asked what he was doing. Was this preparing the soil? He denied it and said that if you leave the weeds to rot, they themselves will turn into excellent fertilizer. The process would go faster with rice bran, but it will do. It takes time, and since he needs fertilizing right now, this will do. He raked out everything that had accumulated in the stove. The ash left over from burning plants contains all the substances the field needs. It is crumbly and dissolves easily, so it will work instantly. Flowers on a dry tree, as they say in one story. Surely the tale of the old man who made gardens bloom was born from exactly this experience. The preparatory stage is almost complete. So what should he plant? There are wheat seeds and potato tubers, and also wild bulbs. There is also this strange specimen. He doesn't feel like eating it, so he will try planting this. I wonder how the changing of seasons is here. The goddess assured me that she chose a world with the most similar climate. It feels like early summer now, but I wonder if there are the usual 4 seasons here. He'll have to figure everything out as he goes. First, he'll sow the field with wheat. He started laying out the seeds, and the birds started eating them and said he brought them more food, so kind. He was confused by this and said they couldn't be eaten. They were seeds. He was planting them in the ground to harvest later. Then, sometimes with the birds' support, sometimes despite their mischievous antics, things got going. He systematically planted various crops. Using tree magic, he helped the plants germinate and regularly irrigated them with water magic. On cloudy days, he used light magic to speed up photosynthesis. When the sun was too merciless, dark magic helped create shade. This was his first real experience in farming. However, thanks to the powers he begged from the goddess, he was able to successfully establish everything. 2 months later, his lands were transformed beyond recognition. MC lay on his bed, contentedly thinking that he was currently enjoying a peaceful life to the fullest. He had rebuilt his fortifications so that he no longer feared monster raids or field devastation. The oppressive feeling of isolation had also disappeared, and now he could rest with a light heart. Besides, his faithful friends often dropped by, birds he named Sakura and Omochi. He said that sometimes they brought their fellows, and then it became very noisy. However, they had warned that they would fly away before the cold weather set in. They had a long and dangerous journey to warmer climes ahead, and it was quite difficult for them. He seemed to have always dreamed of complete solitude, but now for some reason he felt sad. Birds flew to him, calling for help with a worried look. He sat up and loudly asked what had happened. Another monster attack? They said a small man had fallen unconscious there, and he should go there quickly. He was surprised by what he heard and asked, how could a child end up in such a remote place? He ran after them and thought that, whatever the case, he needed to hurry before something irreparable happened. The birds led him into the forest, and he asked loudly, where did a child appear in this forest thicket from? Had he gotten separated from a caravan of travelers? Or was he simply abandoned to his fate? The birds led him to a tree. He began to look around, but saw no one. He said loudly that he had come to help. If he heard, he should answer. No one answered him, and he asked, maybe he had gone somewhere? They denied it and said that he should look more closely. He looked around more closely and saw a fairy lying on the ground and said that. So that's who they meant by the little person. She's like a tiny doll. She shines so softly and is incredibly beautiful. Now is not the time to stare. He needs to help her. Fortunately, there are no wounds or signs of illness. However, her magical powers were almost exhausted. Surely the mana restoration potion received from the goddess should work. Shouldn't it be poured into her mouth? Her mouth was so tiny, he couldn't aim properly. He sneezed, accidentally spilled the potion, and said loudly, looking worried, that he had covered the fairy from head to toe in the potion. She woke up and started coughing, and he said that he was very glad that she had come to her senses. She became very angry and loudly asked what he was doing. Later, when he explained himself, she said that he was very lucky. Not only did he get the chance to save her, but he was also able to talk. He should be proud of that. They, spirits, very rarely deign to communicate with people. Yuri asked in surprise, isn't a spirit the same as a fairy? She said that she was a spirit of beer. Fairies are creatures of flesh and blood, and they, spirits, are ethereal entities entities. He asked if these were some kind of ghosts. She thought it was rude, and he asked her name. She said she didn't need a name. He remarked that it was just like birds, and she got angry and asked loudly what he was hinting at. Did he compare her to birds? He asked, however, this isn't very convenient, right? She said that she had already explained she usually doesn't talk to people, so there are no problems. They, spirits, recognize each other by aura, and therefore don't need names at all. She allows him to call her whatever he wants. If she likes the name, she will answer. He was a little confused by what he heard and asked what she was hinting at now. She asked if he would really abandon such a fragile and exhausted spirit to death. Perhaps she would be under his care for a while, so he should take good care of her. Thus, the spirit joins him, although no one asked her to do so. When the allies approached the settlement, Marcia exclaimed, "So this is his village." The protagonist thought with resignation. She had indeed tagged along. Spirit had noticed, and indeed everything here was quite neglected, just like an abandoned settlement. The protagonist answered, "That's right." She was surprised. What was he talking about? And he and his family had settled in these ruins? MC replied, "No, he's alone here, but those birds circling around him often visit him, so he's not lonely." Marcia thought with pity, a child all alone in a dead village in the middle of the forest. She didn't know what had happened to him, but he'd had a hard time. Yuri, looking at her, noted with bewilderment, why were they looking at him with such compassion? Suddenly it dawned on her and she said in confusion, "If the only inhabitant of the village is a child, then there's no booze here?" The protagonist asked in surprise, "Booze? Of course not." The spirit was shaking and she asked him hopefully, "He's joking, right? At least one keg of beer?" The protagonist replied, "He said no. He'd searched every corner, but he couldn't find any alcohol, nor any traces of its production." Marcia exclaimed irritably, "She's the spirit of alcohol. She couldn't gain strength without booze. Did he want her to starve to death?" MC spread his hands in bewilderment and remarked, "What's he going to do about it?" Suddenly, an idea occurred to him, and he exclaimed, "Maybe a potion would do the trick." It had worked on her. The spirit sighed heavily and agreed with him. True, life force can be obtained from more than just alcohol. To be precise, human-made drinks with healing properties are the source of strength for the spirit of alcohol. But still, elixirs don't taste good, he thought. Of course they're medicine, after all. It was pitiful to look at her. She was very upset. He told her that since she had decided to live here, she would have to compromise. After all, he was sharing his last potions with her purely out of the kindness of his heart. Marcia sighed and replied, "Okay," she understood. Yuri thought she was about to say she was leaving, but it seemed he was mistaken. She had no intention of leaving, so he'd have to keep an eye on her for a while, but then he'd have to solve the food problem. He looked at the list of items in the storage room. It listed a mana potion, 2, a health potion, 3, a sack of grain, wheat, 1. He thought the elixirs he'd received from the goddess were very few. Well, he'd have to try making them himself. After a while, Marcia settled comfortably on a tree branch and dozed off, offended. The protagonist prepared all the ingredients and said, "So he's starting to create potions." He didn't have the ingredients to brew alcohol, and even if he could, he wouldn't be able to drink it anyway. He crafted bottles using earth magic as a backup, just in case potions were the best choice. However, a beginner wouldn't brew something like that on a whim. Crafting potions usually requires skills like potion making or alchemy, as well as specialized knowledge. He should probably have begged the goddess for that too. But he had this. With that in mind, he pulled out a village life guide and decided to search for a method for creating it. After a short while, he found what he was looking for. Even though it was a bonus skill, it was incredibly useful. From now on, he would call him Master. After reading the guide, the protagonist exclaimed in surprise, "Wow, so many different ingredients were there." The list of potions that could be brewed included health potions, mana potions, status potions, defense potions, and agility potions. There were also potions that couldn't be brewed, such as antidote potions, strength-boosting potions, supreme health potions, supreme mana potions, and regeneration potions. MC said in surprise that in addition to healing, there were also stat-boosting potions and potions with other effects. Potions ranged from simple to supreme, crafted from rare materials and using special skills. Fortunately, he could brew several varieties from the available components. Yuri set to work. The process wasn't as difficult as he'd feared. Finally, looking at the orderly, numerous rows of vials, he noted with puzzlement that he seemed to have overdone it a bit. Whatever the case, that spirit would definitely not be without a power source now, and this proved useful. Thanks to the creation of numerous potions, he unlocked the potion brewing skill. The protagonist muttered, "So, he has potential for development. Perhaps he'll master many other things besides the powers the goddess gave him." At that moment, Marcia exclaimed in surprise, "What are these potions?" Hadn't he told her there were hardly any? The protagonist replied that he'd just created them. The spirit asked him in amazement, did he do that himself? She'd never heard of a child brewing potions. He gave her one of the vials and offered to try it, adding that he'd also crafted a small cup for her. The spirit tried his potion and grimaced. It wasn't tasty. The protagonist said in confusion, "Well, it was brewed according to a standard recipe, so that's to be expected." Marcia added with a sad expression, "But it's better than the elixirs she's had so far." Yuri happily asked her, "Is that true?" After a while, she decided to go for a walk. The protagonist thought, "She's just like a cat." Taking one of the vials, he told himself that if it was safe to use, then so be it. With her temperament supplement, she'd hardly praise it without reason. He wondered how it differed from a regular potion. At that moment, Marcia, soaring into the sky, looked at him and said, she'd sensed it the moment they met. This child was different from the people she'd met before. There was no alcohol here, but maybe staying here for a while wouldn't be such a bad idea. 2 weeks had passed since then. The season had entered full summer. Working in the heat was dangerous, sometimes even deadly. This rule held true in the other world too, but it didn't apply to Yuri. Dark magic provided him with shade, and water magic quenched his thirst. Wind magic kept him cool. Marcia asked, puzzled, what about his mana reserves? She'd never heard of anyone using so much magic for farming. The protagonist was surprised, really? But shouldn't he use what's available? He retains enough magical power to cope with an unexpected situation. The spirit said, confused, well, she doesn't really care. Then she'll go and take a nap. The protagonist, without stopping his work, answered, okay, he muttered, throwing grass into the hole. Their relationship was more like that of neighbors than roommates. So, after her appearance, his life hadn't changed much. For him, who doesn't like unnecessary interference, such a personality is ideal. He looked at the sky and noted how high it was, like real summer. Looking at his shirt, MC said, I want some summer clothes too. The purification skill protects against odor, but having one set of clothes is too little. Although it's still early, winter clothes need to be prepared too. Yuri decided to go look for materials that might be useful for this. Walking through the forest, he said, these places are full of a variety of plants. Even in thickets where it would seem there are only weeds, if you look closely, you can find many useful things. Finally, he came across a mao plant, a perennial plant growing wild in the field. Its woody stems can be used to obtain durable fiber. The protagonist exclaimed, what a great find. It grows in entire bushes, enough for 1 or 2 things. After some time, he also discovered cotton. The protagonist said, it's useful, so he should pick it up and try growing it. A bountiful harvest, so it was worth the search. At that moment, he heard a sound. Peeking out from behind the bushes, he was surprised to see a pillar of gnats. Was that even here? Although the gnats that create this pillar don't drink blood. It's unpleasant to walk through. He should avoid it. At that moment, a mosquito appeared next to him. This also surprised MC. Until now, he had only been distracted by magical beasts. Had he really forgotten what he should fear most? The mosquito is the creature that takes the most human lives on Earth. It creeps up unnoticed, transmitting all sorts of infections through its bite. It's the most common, yet most terrifying insect. Come to think of it, there are many creatures that also carry diseases. Ticks, fleas, lice. Since they're hard to spot, they should be feared more than magical beasts. Moreover, this is another world. It wouldn't be surprising if there were diseases and viruses here that don't exist on Earth. He relaxed because of the potions, but they weren't a panacea. The moment this realization hit him, an unimaginable sense of anxiety and terror overtook him. Yuri began swatting the mosquito away, screaming at it to stay away. Running home as fast as he could, he cried out, we can't waste time. Clothes can wait. I need to get some insect repellent. Natural insect repellents include mint, dokodami, and pyrethrum. Since the local vegetation is similar to that of Earth, there must be something similar. Finally, though with great difficulty, he managed to find some parrot, an annual plant that grows in sunny meadows. This is a different kind of pyrethrum from another world. Its flowers contain insect poison. In Japan, mosquito coils were supposedly made from this plant. The village life teacher probably knows how to do this. When the protagonist consulted the village life manual, he exclaimed in amazement, so, you have to keep the collected flowers for 6 months? Winter will be here by then. Surely there must be another good way. Leafing through the manual, he joyfully exclaimed, yes, there is. The protagonist lit the grass and announced with satisfaction, an ancient insect repellent. Smoke, kairibi fire, a type of fire that drives away insects with smoke containing insecticidal compounds, has been used in Japan since ancient times. Pyrite, like pyrethrum, should have the same effect. This way, at least the inside of the home can be protected from pests. At that moment, an enraged Marcia flew up to him and shouted irritably, what is he trying to kill her? He called her a pest, right? Now he'll get it. The astonished MC began to apologize to her. He didn't expect her to be inside. The spirit remarked with offense. Is he trying to drive her out like that? Yuri told her. He apologized, didn't he? She added, it's already summer, and no measures have been taken against the insects. She couldn't figure out if he was a genius or an idiot. It didn't matter to them, spirits. But for humans, insect repellents are essential. There are even some that suck out magical power in swarms and dry you out. The protagonist, smiling, asked her to tell him something else he didn't know when she was in the mood. Marcia looked at him at first, perplexed, then smiled and replied, well, what can you do? Let him make a drink, she'll tell you. The protagonist objected. That's impossible. The spirit was surprised. Why? The MC suddenly noticed the distance between them seemed to have shortened. After a while, Marcia sighed regretfully and said, how she longed for wine. Was there really no kind soul who would do that for her? Yuri replied. He'd said he wasn't going to switch his food supply to alcohol. The spirit snorted and said how greedy he was. He thought she was the spirit of alcohol, and she still didn't have a name. 2 months had already passed since she moved in with him. She told him he could call her whatever he liked. If she liked, she'd answer. After these words, he considered many options, including Ray and Tinkerbell, but she didn't like any of them. And before he knew it, they were intimate, like a couple whose feelings had long since cooled. And so their cohabitation in this tense atmosphere continued until one summer day, something happened. The protagonist noted that the climate here was harsher than in Japan, so everything grew more slowly, but it had happened. The wheat was ripe, time to harvest. With this much, he could bake bread and make udon. Well, time to start harvesting. Marshall stopped him and challenged him to a bet on who could mow the wheat the fastest. If she won, he would brew ale from the wheat. The protagonist spoke up, upset. Again, selfish conditions. And if he won, what then? The spirit had promised him that she would be obedient and obey him in everything. The MC drawled, bewildered. What? It seemed like he didn't need anything from her. Then an idea struck him, and he declared, "It's decided. If he wins, she will never mention drinking again." The spirit was indignant. He was a real monster. Oh well, she just can't lose. She solemnly told him that she accepted his choice. Yuri muttered, puzzled. Actually, she'd forced this on him. He had to resort to earth magic again. Thus, a great battle of sickles began between him and the spirit. As he cut the wheat, he muttered, "Why on earth did she even get involved in this? With her tiny frame, she didn't stand a chance." Marcia shouted at him that they had to begin, and set to work with such speed that the protagonist's eyes nearly popped out of his head. The spirit had said she couldn't stand living without food any longer. Alcohol is power, and she would give it her all. That's the path of a true beer spirit. MC noted with confusion that, thanks to her eternal laziness, he'd completely underestimated her. At this rate, he really would have to waste his precious grain on booze. That couldn't be allowed. He activated the wind cutter and thought, it's not the most honest move, of course, but he was hungry. Meanwhile, Marcia exclaimed, another row down. Victory was almost hers. Yuri launched his skill, and in the blink of an eye, all the wheat was cut down. The magical force barely missed Marcia, but she managed to fly away just in time and looked in amazement at the result of his work. The protagonist, having finished, exhaled and thought that the first harvest had ended so quickly that he hadn't even had time to feel the moment. However, survival was more important. He told her, so he had won. As they had agreed, no more mention of alcohol. The spirit insulted him, calling him a liar. She had never imagined he was capable of such baseness. It was vile. Did he really enjoy tormenting a little spirit? MC answered her. She asked for a bet, and now she's blaming him. He had repeatedly told her that they had no surplus food. Besides, she lived perfectly well on potions alone. So for her, drinking was just a whim. Since she was living under his roof, she could have behaved more modestly. Marcia sadly told him, enough. Let him forgive her for being so selfish. Let him just forget about everything. Taking off, she said goodbye to him and flew away. Yuri grinned in confusion and said, what a wayward girl. And in the end, he was left to blame. That's why he wanted to live alone. Fine, she'll get hungry and come back on her own. After some time, the protagonist said anxiously, it was getting dark and still no sign of her. Had she really left? What if monsters attacked her in the forest? He immediately crossed his arms over his chest and muttered, even if that happened, what did it matter to him? After standing there for a while, he grabbed his weapon, cursed, and ran into the forest to look for her. Meanwhile, Marcia, sitting in a tree, thoughtfully asked, what should she do now? Now that she'd left, returning to that boy wouldn't be easy. But there seemed to be no other settlements nearby, and she had no desire to return to the city where she'd lived before. She needed to find a safe place to spend the night before it got completely dark. Taking off, she set off in search. Suddenly, the spirit noticed that the raspberry was ripe. It ripens from early summer to autumn. Its berries full of sweet, refreshing juice, and are highly prized in confectionery. She remembered the protagonist telling her he'd like to try growing fruit. All the fruit was good for food only, and not at all sweet. No point. I think that's how he put it. After all, sugar, which serves as the basis for alcohol, is irreplaceable in winemaking. If she told him about this, he'd surely change his mind. There were so many of these berries here. Although, why on earth should she go out of her way for him? She wasn't planning on coming back. Well, if he came running for her himself and asked her to come back, she might agree. But no, it sounded like that was all she was waiting for. At that moment, she heard a rustling sound and thought joyfully, had he really come for her? She gasped and said loudly, that doesn't mean she's happy to see him. A huge boar appeared from behind the bushes and looked at her greedily. She screamed in fear and flew to a safe distance, uttering, I almost got caught. At that moment, a snake rustled next to her and opened its mouth ominously. Marcia cried out in fear. Again, the spirit flew up and saw huge birds next to her and cried out, even in the sky there's danger. Hiding, the spirit irritatedly exclaimed, what kind of crazy forest is this? There are scary monsters at every turn. She wouldn't even be able to get out of the thicket like that. If she'd known all this, she would never have left him. Suddenly, there was a rustling sound again. She shuddered and cried out in fear. A monster again! The protagonist appeared from behind the thicket and joyfully exclaimed, finally he'd found her. Thank God, she was safe. He extended his hand to her and invited her to go home. Marcia burst into tears and said, if he insists, so be it, she'll come back. When they got home, she asked him why he'd gone looking for her anyway. He sat down on the bed and told her he simply couldn't leave her. She was partly to blame for her departure. He behaved like a child, despite his age, so let her forgive him. Marcia looked at him in surprise and said, he is a child, just a very strange one. He laughed and said, I guess she's right. The spirit hesitated and sheepishly remarked, well, maybe he should forgive her too. All she did was be capricious. As she promised, she wouldn't whine about drinking anymore. The protagonist shared his plans with her. He planned to expand the garden. He couldn't say exactly when, though, but when conditions were right, he figured they could try making alcohol. Marcia asked him, perplexed, why he'd changed his mind. MC said he remembered something. How hard it was to live on medication alone without the ability to eat anything tasty. And the joy when this ordeal finally ends. Spirit, confused, asked him what he was talking about. Yuri, embarrassed, summed it up by saying he hoped for her help in the future. In the end, he named her Marcia. Spirit, confused, asked him, is that her name? The protagonist replied, yes, what does she mean? He chose it after the goddess of wine from his homeland. If she doesn't like it, he'll definitely come up with another one. Marcia quietly said her name, smiled, and said, yes, she likes it. Thank him very much. Meanwhile, in the village of End, located more than 10 kilometers southwest of the protagonist's abode, the adventurers were desperately fighting a huge grizzly bear monster. The group's leader said that if this monster breaks into the village, they're finished. Reinforcements are on the way, they must hold out to the last. The grizzly growled menacingly, bared its fangs, and turning, fled into the forest. The leader said, he escaped after all, the bastard. The clever one, however, was caught. It's a true miracle that no one died in the fight with this enemy. One of the team members asked the commander if they shouldn't give chase. The leader told him they couldn't go too far. Besides, that's where those very lands begin. It's an affected area, teeming with monsters where no one lives. There, that beast can run amok to its heart's content. At the time, Yuri had no idea that the place where he had settled was called the affected lands. Marcia, looking out the window, told him that wonderful ratspell berries grew there, and that they could go there tomorrow and pick them. MC agreed with her. He had no idea a formidable enemy was approaching. The next day, the allies set out for the place Marcia had mentioned. The protagonist, wolfing down the berries, exclaimed in delight, wow, how delicious. Looking at the berry, he exclaimed, so this is what a ratspell is? He'd been dreaming of just such a sweet treat. The protagonist suggested Marcia grow this crop at home. Sometime later, returning home, the spirit set down a bowl of berries and warned MC not to eat them all at once. They'd worked so hard to obtain these ingredients for wine. He laughed, popped the berry into his mouth, and told her not to worry. He couldn't fit that much. But is it really possible to make wine from just the fruit? Marcia answered, exactly. Usually, sugar is added to the berries for fermentation, but the local berries are incredibly sweet, so everything should work. As they began preparing, the spirit remarked that the technique itself wasn't all that complicated. First, the washed berries should be crushed, skins included. Then, they should be placed in a clean vessel and left for a couple of months in the shade, where air circulates. The main thing is to remember to stir them daily to ensure a uniform process. Yuri remarked in surprise, and that was it? But what about the yeast? Surely he wouldn't need it? The spirit answered him that it most likely lives on the surface of the fruit itself. And then it all depends on pure luck. If the right fungi grow, you'll get wine. But if harmful bacteria take over, everything will simply rot. The protagonist applied the assessment to the berries and realized they were edible, but the microflora on the surface was unidentified. He thought this skill couldn't identify specific types of microorganisms. If he used purification, the beneficial yeast would also be destroyed. So magic was powerless here. He'd have to rely on luck. However, crafting by hand has its charm. While stirring the fruit, he noted, by the way, that miso and soy soup are also prepared using a similar recipe. If they had access to milk, they could also make cheese and yogurt. If they mastered the technology and learned to control it, their possibilities would be limitless. This question definitely deserved careful study. Having finished his task, he asked the spirit if she thought it had turned out well. Marcia looked at the substance and replied that it looked quite respectable. Resting her face in her hands, she said dreamily, I can't wait to try it. I wonder if it will ripen before autumn. How she longs to speed up time. I can't stand it. The protagonist thought she was behaving like a schoolgirl doing her biology assignment. He wondered out loud how she had managed to get to the point where she almost disappeared into the thicket. It would have been far more logical for her to live comfortably in some wine cellar. Had she really been driven away, or had something similar happened? The spirit immediately frowned and lowered her eyes. He caught himself and said, please forgive him. He hadn't meant to hurt her. But Marcia grabbed his face and asked if he would really listen to her story. It was all just awful. Thank him for asking. He shuddered at her agility and noted that she had frightened him. The spirit began her story. For many years, her home had been a brewery in a large city. Its owner, an old man, was a kind man and understood their language. In places where creatures like her lived, the intoxicating drink protected by their protection was much more delicious. In gratitude, people always left them offerings. That's how they had existed since time immemorial, helping each other out. But when the old man passed away, all affairs passed into the hands of his son. That's when everything went wrong. He was only after profit, skimping on raw materials and workers, causing the quality of the beer to plummet. As long as their name was on the bottle, people would buy anything. No one knew the difference between real taste. And then, the old man's son declared her a pest who stole wine and decided to get rid of her. He contacted a spirit exorcist and told him to kill her immediately. The neighboring distilleries were already occupied by other spirits, so she was forced to set out in search of a new home. Eventually, she became completely lost in the forest and collapsed. The MC, confused, said, "So that's it." Clearly, such a businessman wouldn't even listen to her. The spirit noticed, but what can I say? He simply didn't hear her voice. Truth be told, most people see them as dimly flickering lights. To the naked eye, a spirit is just a ghostly glimmer. She used to say she wasn't particularly fond of communicating with people, but frankly, there are almost no people left who can hear them. Therefore, people like him are worth their weight in gold. Yuri asked her in surprise why he saw her so clearly then. Marcia answered that it must be the quality of his magic, or their compatibility. She believed that his potions were easier to drink than others for this very reason. The creator's magical aura leaves a strong imprint on his creations. The protagonist was impressed by her words, really. He thought, a little embarrassed, but it was pleasant to hear. He remarked that they could only hope the wine would turn out excellent. The spirit agreed with him. A month later, the allies realized the wine had been a complete failure. Marcia sobbed, crying out in bewilderment. But why? The protagonist was also upset. Everything had been smooth only in theory. The spirit declared doomedly, "The end, life is empty. No dreams remained. No hope." MC decided to support her, so with a smile, he told her to pull herself together. There's no need to despair. They can always try again. Autumn is just around the corner, so there will be plenty of berries. Spirit stopped crying, but it was clear she was depressed. After a while, Yuri said, "Yeah, if he doesn't find a way to fix this, Marcia will completely fall into depression." Suddenly, at that moment, he heard a sound and muttered, "It seems there's someone behind the wall." This sound didn't at all resemble the scraping of stone. Had someone fallen into the pit, he'd prepared for defense, then he would deal with the intruder and butcher them. When the protagonist went to look at the source of the sound, he froze in astonishment. Before him sat a huge grizzly bear, devouring the carcass of a wild boar trapped in a pit trap. One of the monster's eyes was closed, and a jagged scar ran across the entire eyelid. The protagonist thought feverishly, "Autumn? A blessed time when forests and hills generously share their gifts. It's also a time when both people and animals diligently prepare for the cold weather, and magical beasts were no exception." The grizzly, noticing him, rose to its full height. MC noted with alarm, a bear, and a monstrously huge one at that. Had he really pulled out a boar stuck in a pitfall trap? What power, indeed. Yuri tried to calm down. If his memory served him correctly, one mustn't panic when encountering a bear. One must retreat slowly, maintaining eye contact and increasing the distance. Turning one's back or running away is strictly prohibited. Otherwise, the beast will recognize him as prey and begin pursuing at full speed. In that case, if it runs, he can lure it. It's time to act before it senses a trap. The protagonist carried out his plan, running very quickly and standing behind a large pit. He took up a position right in front of the trap. If he could interrupt the enemy's charge, he could do it. The grizzly rushed after him. The protagonist knew he could easily vault over the wall with such a bulk, and if he let go now, he could forget about peace. He mentally apologized to his opponent for having to finish him off. But the bear, approaching the trap, suddenly jumped to the side. MC couldn't believe his eyes. He had dodged. As expected of a predator, it combined not only strength, but also astonishing cunning. The opponent roared terrifyingly. The protagonist cried out, so how could he do that? Waiting for the opponent to jump, he activated his magic. The bear, flying over the pit, roared again. The protagonist thought, when he jumped, an impressive amount of pressure had built up. Even better, he wouldn't be able to dodge it in midair. Waiting for the right moment, MC created a magical stone wall right in front of him. The grizzly, hitting this wall, simply fell into the pit. Wasting no time, Yuri decided to douse everything with water. When everything was done, the protagonist folded his hands in prayer and asked the beast's forgiveness, adding that he had promised to put its remains to maximum use. After a while, he assessed the defeated monster and realized it was a grizzly gambit. He exclaimed in surprise, even if a weakling like him could defeat it, does that mean it was a lower-ranking creature? The locals, accustomed to such surroundings, must be incredibly dangerous. Let him never encounter a single human again. Thus, Yuri continued to dwell in his profound delusion. He selected the clean mode on his tablet and decided to butcher the bear carcass later when he had time. Having stored the spoils, MC said, "Now, I need to get something for Marsh." After a while, he joyfully informed the spirit that he was home. Showing her a full bowl of various fruits, he told her to just look at how much he'd managed to collect today. The spirit sat on her knees, completely stunned, her entire state expressing absolute nihilism. He anxiously asked her what had happened to her. Marcia, openly crying, answered him. She suddenly realized that everything in this world was only decay and vanity. The protagonist noted with alarm that she was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. He handed her the fruit and said he'd found something worthwhile, so she should pull herself together. These were overripe and fermented wild berries. They could easily replace wine. The spirit made a clicking sound, and he wondered in surprise what she'd just done. Marcia said that he apparently still hadn't understood. She'd asked for a true healing drink, created by humans. Noble alcohol is a centuries-old history of the union of humans and spirits. He was far more significant than this random imitation of nature. Sighing, she took the berry and said, "Okay, she'll try just a little." Biting into it and tasting the fruit, she remarked in surprise, "Wow, it really is quite good. Is there another berry like that?" The protagonist grumbled. Sometimes he can't understand her. After a while, the spirit admitted that these fruits warmed her up well. He thought, at least she'd return to normal. Looking out the window, MC noticed that the days had become noticeably shorter, and it was starting to get noticeably colder. Winter would soon arrive in this world, which meant they needed to begin serious preparations to spend the winter warm and comfortable. In his mind's eye, the ideal wintering environment included a fireplace, warm clothes, plenty of food, fruit, and Marcia. Yuri told the spirit, well, from today on, they'll get serious about preparing for winter. They needed to secure 4 things first: heating, provisions, clothing, and bedding. Marcia supported his idea. He asked her how people kept warm in the city where she used to live. The spirit answered, of course, with a fireplace. The protagonist, puzzled, said as he had assumed. She asked him if there was a problem. MC said he'd initially imagined a fireplace, but the heating radius would be too small, and their house had stone floors. Even under the blankets, the chill from the ground would pierce. Besides, burning double the amount of firewood in both the stove and the fireplace was wasteful. The firewood collection simply wouldn't keep up with that kind of expense. Marcia asked him, so what's the solution? Yuri thought for a moment, then exclaimed, I have an idea. He was already skilled in magic, so it was worth a try. The protagonist began to create what he had in mind, adjusting the product periodically. Marcia was a little frightened by this sight. After a while, he exclaimed, it's done. A heated floor using excess heat from the stove. The spirit asked him in surprise, what did he just say? The protagonist laughed and told her to simply touch the floor. When the spirit did, she exclaimed in surprise, it's warm. The protagonist explained that he had installed an additional stove 1 level below, so the heat would flow directly under the flooring. Passing under the floor, the heat would exit through the chimney. After all the heat and smoke had previously simply escaped through the roof window, right? He decided that such a treasure shouldn't be allowed to go to waste. He had also kept the old stove for the summer, so she shouldn't worry. Could she even hear him? Marcia lay down on the floor, closed her eyes in pleasure, and noticed that she seemed to be languishing in the sun. She had never experienced anything like this. It was too pleasant. MC noted how quickly she'd fallen asleep. Let her sleep in the warmth while he got to work. Yuri went out into the garden, rolling up his sleeves, and declared, it's autumn in their beds. As he harvested, he grumbled. Who would have known the seed tubers from the village would grow so luxuriantly? Now he'd see what a harvest there was. Pulling up the root vegetables, the protagonist exclaimed joyfully, what a harvest! Perhaps the soil is fertile, but both the wild plants and the crops are turning out excellent. Why did people abandon this land? This place is wasted. In one of the beds, he noted with puzzlement that the tops looked different, and that was odd. Pulling on a stem, the protagonist saw strange root vegetables emerging from the soil one after another. He even let out a frightened cry. They looked so strange, like creatures. Then he remembered, right, he was the one planting this. It had completely slipped his mind. MC tugged on the stem even harder, and a long branch revealed a multitude of identical fruits. Yuri exclaimed in surprise, really? They've really grown. He wondered what these things were that looked so much like mandrakes. After asking for an appraisal, he learned they were Halgenslein. He noted with bewilderment that they didn't look like mandrakes. Of course, they could be used as raw materials for potions. With such supplies, he could even open a pharmacy. Still, it was worth collecting them. After a while, he busily examined the results of his work. He dug up plenty of potatoes, stored up grain and meat, and even had some fruit. Now they won't go bad until spring. All that was left were winter clothes and bedding. Boar bristles weren't suitable for wearing, but bear fur seemed suitable. It's a hassle, of course, but if he spins the yarn, he'll be able to knit sweaters. The clothes are all clear, the materials are there, but the bedding is a problem. Bear fur alone won't solve the problem. The skin itself is heavy, sleeping under it is torture, and spinning that much wool for a blanket is an impossible task. Ideally, he'd sew covers from plant fibers and stuff them with cotton, but he couldn't find any cotton in this climate yet, so he'd have to make a straw mattress. At that moment, Omochi flew up to him and called out to him. The protagonist joyfully greeted his pet and asked him if he'd arrived alone. Omochi replied that Sakura would arrive later. The protagonist noticed he'd become plumper than usual. Perhaps he'd overfed him? What if he started flying slowly, got caught by a predator, and disappeared? He petted the pet, and Omochi laughed and said it tickled. MC realized, no, he didn't seem all that plump. Most likely, he was starting to shed his feathers for the winter. And suddenly, his eyes widened with a sudden idea. Winter fluff. Omochi noticed that his eyes had become very scary. Yuri laughed and replied to the bird he just thought, if only he could get that much fluff. Omochi asked him in surprise, does he need feathers? He already had a big nest. Why else would he build one? The protagonist answered his friend, he doesn't need a nest. He just wants to use the feathers. But he needed a lot of it. Does he happen to know where he can get more of it? Omochi told him there was some onion a little further away. The protagonist asked him in surprise, What is it? At that moment, a cry for help was heard. MC recognized it as Sakura's voice. Was she being attacked? Jumping outside, Yuri exclaimed in surprise. What are these creatures? They were so huge. Taking into account their wingspan, they were about 10 meters. They were simply enormous birds, chasing Sakura. Omochi exclaimed, Luca, they've attacked. The protagonist asked him, are these the same ones? He thought, if they attack him, his house and fields are doomed to destruction. And most importantly, his friends will suffer. The protagonist exclaimed, there's no way he'll let his friends fall prey. MC instantly activated his wind cutter and attacked the enemies. One of the monsters repelled his attack, much to Yuri's surprise. It dawned on him, they must have wrapped their bodies in wind magic to keep those massive bodies aloft. That's why their wind current had dampened his wind cutter. The enemy shouted to his kind, there's an enemy here. The Luki began to chatter. Pray, kill them, pray. Yuri noted in confusion, are they talking too? But it looked like dialogue wouldn't work. In that case, he'd destroy them without hesitation. There were 3 opponents, and they were very fast. If he focused on one, the others would immediately attack. So, first, he needed to break their formation. After all, he'd honed his magic day after day, preparing for any eventuality, so he should be able to handle it without further preparation. He activated the beam, a magical attack of light that concentrated a powerful beam of light in one spot to blind the enemy, and attacked. The Luki scattered in all directions, and the protagonist thought, perfect timing. He immediately cast confusion magic, a type of darkness that stupefies the enemy and deprives them of the ability to make decisions. He wanted to buy himself time to concentrate and unleash his signature attack. He created a huge water ball and trapped the opponents within it. The enormous birds were finished. At that moment, Marcia appeared and exclaimed in bewilderment, he'd killed giant Luka birds? And 3 at once, no less? MC sheepishly replied yes, but he felt a bit awkward constantly drowning his enemies. He needed to find a way to destroy them without causing them unnecessary suffering. Spirit exclaimed in surprise, wow, what a child. After a while, he informed her that the materials were ready and they could begin crafting. First, they needed to obtain the fiber. The skins, removed from the collected plants, needed to be soaked in water for several hours. Then, using a special tool, he removed the surface layer, leaving behind pure white fiber. After thoroughly drying the material, Yuri split it into small pieces and began weaving. The resulting threads were strong. His guidance on country life skill guided him, so the work proceeded smoothly. Thanks to this, he created threads with a speed unimaginable for an ordinary person. He wove the finished threads into sacks and filled them with the purest down, collected from fallen Luka, which had undergone purifying. And finally, the down comforter was ready. The protagonist rejoiced, and Marcia happily noted that she too had a blanket. Similarly, using the guidance on country life skill, he transformed bear fur into yarn and prepared sweaters. Thus, in just a few days, the allies prepared for winter. However, his plan for a comfortable wintering was not yet complete. Marcia enjoyed the comfort of lying on the warm floor in her sweater. She felt completely safe. The spirit spoke. Leaving the city was the right decision, but with a drink, it would be absolutely perfect. The protagonist remarked with a smile, if you think about it that way, then isn't it too low aspirations to consider this ideal? She looked at him closely and asked what that expression was on his face. Was that really all? He pointed and told her to look there. The spirit exclaimed in surprise, a new room? What is this? Some kind of storage room. The MC pointed to a large stone bowl in the middle of the room and solemnly declared, it's a bathtub. Marcia approached it and remarked in bewilderment, a bathtub? What is that? Yuri was surprised. She had no idea what a bathtub was. This was the culture of another world. He explained everything to her, and she grunted in confusion and said, that's strange. The protagonist looked at her, confused. The spirit explained her position to him, but wasn't she right? Dirt from the body can be removed with a cleansing spell. He himself does that all the time. And besides, purposely building such a structure and immersing yourself in hot water was simply a waste of energy. He objected, but it was so boring. In any case, in his homeland, it was a crucial part of the culture. She would understand everything herself when she tried it. The spirit answered that she was fine as is. The heated floor and a thick sweater were enough for warmth. A warm floor, it was simply a fairy tale. She lay back down on it and exhaled with pleasure. The protagonist thought that in a world where magic was commonplace, such a reaction was inevitable. Out loud, he said, so be it. At least he could enjoy it alone without any remorse. Undressing, he tested the water temperature with his foot and sank into it with pleasure, periodically making sounds of delight in the pleasant warmth. Marcia, hearing this, wondered what those sounds were. MC laughed joyfully and declared, this is his first real bath in a long time. It's just incredible bliss. A large bathtub is wonderful after all. He'd always dreamed of one that resembled a hot spring. He'd been able to wash himself in the hospital, but it was nothing compared to this. When he first came here, he never imagined he'd be able to take a bath again, but all of this was only possible thanks to his mastery of magic. The water is heated using a combination of water and fire magic, so he doesn't need firewood. Moreover, the water can be reheated. Washing the body and cleaning the bathroom are done through cleansing, so he doesn't need any detergents. There were no towels here, but excess moisture can be removed with water magic. And the combination of wind and fire allows one to imitate a hairdryer. With magic, one can live comfortably even without electricity or tools. While enjoying the hot water, Yuri noticed it was getting colder every day, but but he didn't have to worry about that anymore. His winter preparations were complete. After a while, snow fell. The protagonist, stepping outside, noted that this world really did have 4 seasons. He even managed to build a snowman in the shape of a rabbit, making the ears from Luca bird feathers and drawing the eyes and mouth with soot. He continued, perhaps because he was now in a child's body, the sight of falling snow excited him so much. Entering the house, the protagonist complained that his hands and feet were completely frozen, and he urgently needed to warm up in the bathroom. Marcia cautiously told him to wait. He was clearly hiding something from her. MC wondered what she was talking about. Spirit shouted irritably, "Tell him to get the alcohol. He's secretly drinking in there. Let him admit it. He must have gotten his hands on something tasty and hidden it from her." Yuri exclaimed in confusion. What alcohol? He was still a child after all. Marcia persisted. Ever since he got this bathtub of his, he's been disappearing into it every other day. It seemed extremely suspicious. Besides, simply sitting in hot water couldn't possibly cause the strange sounds he was making. And now she understood everything. He was making those sounds precisely when he took a swig from the bottle. The protagonist was outraged to think that such sounds were caused by drinking alcohol. That was what was truly strange. Spirit exclaimed, "Aha! So he's going to continue pretending he knows nothing. Then let her use this tub too, and she'll prove to him that he's blatantly lying to her." After a while, she was unrecognizable. As she basked in the hot water, she made the same sounds he did, exclaiming, "What the hell is this? It's simply amazing. From now on, she'll be using it too." The protagonist remarked, "Well, that was to be expected." The very next day, a separate small bathtub was installed for Marcia. It was the size of a small basin. Yuri had to draw water for her every day. But the spirit didn't know when to stop and often felt ill afterwards. He told her, really, he always asks her to get out before she overheats. Now he has to constantly take care of her. When there was no answer, the protagonist wondered if she had fallen asleep. He wondered if at first, even though the bathtub was doll-sized, he was embarrassed to open the door while Marcia was bathing. This became a daily routine, and soon he stopped feeling anything. The days passed, time inexorably flowed on. The seasons came and went, and then, on one sunny warm day, MC threw his arms up and joyfully exclaimed, "Finally, the most comfortable time of the year, summer, has arrived." Thus, Yuri celebrated his second year of life in another world. The protagonist exclaimed, time flew by, and now life in another world had entered its second year. He'd more or less established his daily routine, so this year he intended to achieve even higher standards. He understood that to develop self-sufficiency, he needed to keep a daily journal. In fact, sometime after reincarnation, he'd started keeping a diary, but this was already threatening to become a problem. The protagonist looked at a whole warehouse of stone tablets and asked, "What should I do with this?" There was no paper, so he engraved text on these very tablets, but if this continued, the floor would collapse. The map of the area he'd found wasn't paper either, but parchment. It seemed that this village either had no paper at all, or it was incredibly valuable. The solution came a little later. MC decided to make paper, having prepared everything he needed, but he was tormented by a question. He had decided to do it, but how was paper made anyway? Marcia replied with a sleepy yawn that she wasn't interested. He thought he already had some plants suitable for the raw material. These included several types of fibrous weeds, as well as tree bark. An herb with insecticidal properties to protect the supplies from insects, Yuri exclaimed. A guide to rural life always helps in difficult times. He was immensely grateful to the goddess for giving him this as well. If not for this, who knows what would have happened to him now? The protagonist had discovered a way to make paper from plants. First, the plant material had to be crushed and washed with water. The prepared material had to be boiled in a concentrated alkaline solution to remove all impurities except the fibers. Then, he had to tap it with a rubber mallet to finally separate the fibers. The separated fibers had to be dissolved in water, and using a special tool, they were formed into sheets using a paper mold with a fine metal mesh on the bottom. The protagonist thoughtfully uttered, "Concentrated alkali, a rubber mallet," and realized he wouldn't be able to obtain any of these, including the metal mesh, or anything else that could replace them. Perhaps it really would be easier to create a tablet storage facility with magic? He immediately countered himself. He just talked about improving quality, and now he's giving up? Marcia muttered discontentedly. How noisy. MC, ignoring her, continued. If you set your sights on a goal, you'll always find a way. Ingenuity is key. He just needs to gather his thoughts and strength. The first step is boiling it in concentrated alkali. This is necessary to dissolve the unwanted plant parts and extract the fiber. Perhaps something similar could be accomplished with magic. He checked his status skills and found dark magic decomposition. There it is. The fibers are strong enough, so they should survive. He needs to be careful so that only the unwanted parts rot. Having completed this manipulation, Yuri successfully extracted the fiber. Now he had to break it down finely. Instead of a rubber mallet, he created an earthen one, deciding that would also work, and began to split the fiber. Marcia complained that the noise was making it impossible to sleep. The protagonist fashioned a homemade stone mold, soaked the crushed fiber in water, then placed it all in the mold and dried it. The most important thing was to distribute the fibers contained in the water finely and evenly. He wondered if he could do this with water magic. After trying, he realized he couldn't. The fibers lay unevenly. Manipulating water alone couldn't accomplish such delicate work. The protagonist was frustrated. The fibers had completely crumbled, and wood magic was also powerless. He hadn't expected that creating paper would encounter so many obstacles. But since he'd come this far, he simply had to find a way out. Sometime later, Marcia came to him and told him she was home. But seeing his enthusiasm, she muttered, "He's still doing it." Suddenly, MC exclaimed joyfully, "It worked!" Marcia shuddered in surprise. Yuri continued. He'd finally grasped the principle of moving the fibers for an even distribution. All that was left was to dry it, and the paper would be ready. He'd make more before he forgot this feeling. Spirit thought, what a frightening persistence. He truly was a very strange child. At that moment, Yuri unknowingly mastered attributeless magic. It was the only way to manipulate matter without a specific attribute. In this world where magic was valued solely by its attribute, this was an achievement no one had even dreamed of. But of course, the protagonist had no idea. A few days later, he examined the prepared sheets and noted with surprise, it was real paper. It was rough to the touch, but that was precisely what gave it its unique charm. He cut all the sheets to the same size, threaded them with a stone needle, and stitched them together. Holding up his masterpiece, he joyfully exclaimed, "The diary is ready." The protagonist hugged it to himself and admiringly remarked on the feeling of accomplishment. After all, creating something through trial and error is so exciting. He also made a charcoal pencil from the clay charcoal he found, which he wrapped in scraps of paper. Afterwards, he declared with satisfaction, now he'll finally get rid of these tablets. Marcia told him he looked so happy. He smiled back, and of course, it's so wonderful when his possibilities expand. The spirit said, in that case, she has news about a rare ingredient. He'll be curious about it, won't he? MC was very interested. Yes, and what is that ingredient? She showed him a maple leaf and exclaimed, "That's it." Yuri noted in surprise, "A leaf? Could that be edible?" The spirit explained to him that the sap of this tree was actually used. He mused, "Tree sap?" Judging by the shape, it was maple syrup. The protagonist activated the evaluation and confirmed his suspicions. He said, "There's no doubt about it. This is a sugar maple leaf, the sap from which the famous syrup is made. In this world they call it maple. Did that mean the tree itself grows somewhere nearby?" Marcia answered, "It's hard to say. She'd only stumbled upon some fallen leaves by chance. But it's worth looking, isn't it?" The protagonist mused, perhaps so. He thought, there's no point in thinking too much ahead, but he was already mentally preparing for pancakes. And so he'd been drawn into this adventure so easily. He looked at the spirit, whose entire appearance suggested she was already planning something, and laughingly said, most likely, these were the words she had in mind. Since they'd obtained the valuable sugar, she'd make him make alcohol. Sometime later, when MC went searching with his allies, he told Omochi and Sakura, it's good they were nearby. He couldn't find such a find blindly. He hadn't expected them both to decide to spend the winter in his abode. In fact, the birds had spent that winter under Yuri's roof. They told him the flight was dangerous and difficult, but he was feeding them, and they were safe. The protagonist said sheepishly, now that's what he understood. Trust. At that moment, the birds informed him they had arrived. Pointing to a huge maple tree, they said it was a sap tree. The protagonist exclaimed in admiration, "Wow, how majestic it is." Coming closer, he examined the bark and said, "It must be some monster's claw marks. The sap is already starting to ooze." MC dipped his finger in the oozing sap, licked it, and noted a slightly sweet taste. If this nectar were collected and properly boiled, it would make excellent syrup. There was just one problem. This tree grew here in splendid isolation, with no other trees nearby. If they took too much sap, the tree might simply wither. He tried to slightly widen the existing cut and inserted a small branch. After waiting a bit, Yuri said, what a problem. The amount of sap one tree produces isn't enough for both his cooking needs and for Marcia's booze. Besides, if the tree dies, they won't be able to find another one. They'll have to take risks. When he returned home, the spirit asked him if he'd managed to extract any sap. They needed to start making alcohol quickly. The protagonist laughed and said, a predictable reaction. She asked him what he was doing. He told her he was taking cuttings. He'd cut several young maple shoots. This way the branches would take root and eventually grow into a full-fledged tree. He trimmed the foliage so that excess moisture and nutrients weren't wasted. The planting tip was cut at an angle to facilitate root development. This way they could harvest sap right at their doorstep. Marcia, puzzled, told him it was quite a long time. He agreed with her. Well, yes, about the same time an oak tree takes to become a table. Surprised, she asked him again. What had he said? MC answered, what's unclear? Having started boiling the syrup, he said, well, now there's no need to worry about the future of his reserves. He would start boiling the sap. Stirring the liquid, Yuri said that if he evaporated the liquid to 1/40 of its volume, it would make excellent syrup. Marcia was indignant. How much? There would be almost nothing left. The protagonist had noted precisely that, so he would, of course, try to use the current batch for alcohol. Spirit looked at him in surprise and asked what he had said. He really agreed to this? But it would take decades for the cuttings to grow. He replied that he would use the tree's magic to accelerate their growth, so they wouldn't have to wait forever. Besides, he only learned of the existence of Meepaul thanks to her. Spirit said his name gratefully. she thought. Everything is going according to plan. The protagonist thought actually he wanted to save the syrup for pancakes, but he had neither eggs nor milk anyway. But let her console herself with the thought of his generosity. A few hours later, the syrup was ready. MC exclaimed admiringly, "This shade and aroma, real maple, or rather, maple syrup." Yuri tasted a drop and was delighted. It was incredibly delicious. He was enveloped in a noble, deep, and invigorating joy. This was it, the true taste of happiness. He decided to try again. Marcia indignantly asked him, "He remembered about the alcohol, didn't he?" Yuri replied, "Yes, he remembers. He remembers." Continuing with his manipulations, he said, "You need to dilute the syrup with water. Maintain the temperature at about 20 degrees and leave it for a couple of days. The juice contains wild yeast, so it should ferment successfully. It will be like mead, only maple-based. True, distillation or something similar will probably be necessary in the future, but they'll get to such serious things in time." Marcia said she was looking forward to it. After some time, he brought the vial and told the spirit, "This is what happened after a few days." She thought he was saying something incomprehensible again. The protagonist sniffed it and remarked that it smelled good. Pouring the contents into a small cup, he handed it to her and offered her a taste. Marcia drank it with pleasure and exclaimed joyfully, she hadn't felt so alive in a long time. "Thank him so much." The protagonist laughed and said it seemed his efforts hadn't been in vain. There was only a little left, so let her drink it little by little. The spirit exclaimed, of course, but she drained it to the last drop that same evening. The next day she said regretfully, "Booze, why isn't there any?" The MC answered her, because she had drunk it herself. The spirit, crying, asked him how many years it would take to get the next batch. He noted to himself that she had turned white again. Yuri told her he didn't think there was any point in despairing so much. Let her look out the window. The meatball they recently planted had already grown so much, Marcia noted with surprise, and indeed, although, a few days ago, it was just a branch. The protagonist said that tree magic helps more than he thought. Apparently, growth accelerates proportionally to the magic invested. Previously, he only used it to aid germination, so he didn't know. But he tested it on potato seedlings, and behold the result. The spirit exclaimed, now she understood why the monsters in this forest are so huge and strong, and why all the food is so tasty and juicy, and also, her health was excellent. He sarcastically remarked, "Really?" The spirit told him it was all because of the dense mana in this forest. MC was surprised. Was there mana in the local air? Marcia confirmed this, adding that animals and plants are strongly influenced by mana. Suddenly, she exclaimed, if he injected mana around the clock, the juice could be extracted very quickly. He replied that he would not do that, and added, however, that in that case, even more questions arise. Why did the previous inhabitants abandon such good lands? Marcia hesitated but said, because the monsters are strong. Yuri waved her hand dismissively, saying, come on, this is nonsense. Monsters even a child could defeat. No, that wasn't the reason. Spirit thought he was just crazy. He added, if there was another village nearby, they might be able to find out why. She clarified, aren't there? She hadn't seen a single living soul since she'd been here. He thought, they say curiosity leads to trouble, so it's best not to pry. But if the village was abandoned because of the cataclysm, he should prepare. After a while, Sakura informed him of another human village. The birds rose high, and Omochi shouted to his companion, let her see. It really is a village. The protagonist was surprised. Do people really live there? The birds answered him, no, there aren't any. The village is very old. He thoughtfully noted, meaning there must be another abandoned village besides this one. Now, without uncovering the truth, his anxiety wouldn't leave him. He asked his pets if they could take him there. The birds replied, no problem. Marcia asked, puzzled, take where? The protagonist told her it seemed there was another abandoned village there, and he was going to explore. The spirit wished him a safe journey. As he walked away, she watched him go, and listening to his dialogue with the birds, she wondered if this child could really speak to birds. His mana reserves and the number of spells he had weren't even comparable to a human's. If he fell into the wrong hands, they'd snatch him up in a flash and carry him around in a cage. After some thought, she finally decided he'd be fine. Since it was an abandoned village, he wouldn't meet anyone there. She'd go take a nap for now. When MC arrived, he saw destroyed houses and asked if this was the second village. There was nothing left of it. It had been abandoned before his village. Looking at the building materials, he noticed that the houses had completely rotted away. Suddenly, something glittered on the ground. It was a coin. Yuri was surprised. Was this local currency? If he looked closely, many different things were left here. He would take everything that could be useful to him. After collecting the items, he examined his finds. They were a pickaxe, a hammer, and coins. He declared, not a bad haul. Even though everything was rusty, he was just about ready to get some metal. Looking through the coins, he realized there was gold, silver, and even copper among them. He had a decent amount of money, too. If the time ever came, he would use them. They were already unclaimed, after all. Looking at the small bag, he decided to evaluate it. Perhaps it was under the influence of something. Analysis revealed that it was a magical bag, an artifact that could hold many things. Only at the moment, it was not functioning because it had run out of mana. The protagonist said that magical items were durable, useful around the farm, and he'd study it later. At that moment, his pets informed him they'd found food. He praised them and saw that they'd found soybeans. Opening the pod, he inspected the fruit and realized it was soybeans, a crop similar to Earth's soybeans. They improve the soil, but require careful cultivation due to their tendency to deplete the soil with repeated plantings. The protagonist happily exclaimed, "Is that really what's here? Soybeans are miso, soy sauce, tofu, the possibility of recreating the foundations of Japanese culture in this world. The prospects are expanding. If we grow them in the same place, the soil will become depleted and disease will set in," which meant this place could be used as a second field. It seemed there were plenty of other things left here besides soybeans. Then he thoughtfully remarked that, frankly, it was too early to rejoice. The mystery of the villagers' disappearance became even more puzzling. If they'd abandoned so many vital items and left, it must have been a serious threat. But was it a natural disaster, or the work of an unknown, powerful monster? Yes, there were many questions, but practically no answers. Well, lingering here was dangerous. That was enough for today. He had to get going. He needed to think of a plan to strengthen his home's defenses. Meanwhile, in the village of End, a few dozen kilometers away, the following was happening. The villagers had gathered in the council hall, discussing the situation. They were perplexed. Could it really be true that the evil Luca who controlled the forest had disappeared? Incredible, after all, they had reigned supreme there for generations. It was their fault that the surrounding villages had been reduced to deserted ruins. But if this news were confirmed, it would be sheer joy. After many decades, they would regain access to the forest's riches. Odell, the village elder, said they needed to begin preparing for reconnaissance. It seemed they really should check it out for themselves. After a while, they set out. One of the villagers asked his comrades if everything would be all right. This was his first time traveling so far from their village. His comrade told him not to worry, not to be so frightened. That forest was indeed dangerous, but the most powerful monsters never left its depths. They wouldn't venture deep, limiting themselves to a brief reconnaissance. The chances of encountering such creatures were negligible, Odell said, and yet, they hadn't ventured into those parts for too long, so they should keep their eyes peeled. He thought their harvests were getting poorer with each passing season. If nothing changed, they would soon face true famine. These forested lands could be their only salvation. A man, having ventured so far from the village for the first time, asked his comrades how much longer they had to go. The men told him they were almost there. They'd just passed the hill ahead and they'd be there. When the group of villagers crossed the hill, they were stunned. They exclaimed in disbelief, "It can't be. A rabid boar? Had this monster really left the forest thicket? They needed to get away from here quickly. Besides, they needed to lay down a smoke screen immediately. Have the monster's domains expanded so much? In that case, they could forget about reconnaissance." Meanwhile, the protagonist, gathering various crops in the forest, said, "This too needs to be assessed." Incidentally, he'd rarely encountered any monsters lately. It was pleasant to roam freely, but such silence was alarming. His hunt could hardly have led to their complete disappearance. Omochi and Sakura, their relatives, perched on a branch, told them there were clearly more islands of safety around them. Could this really be the work of that man? Omochi replied that Yuri was incredibly powerful. Sakura added that even the fiercest predators trembled before him. Thus, a little over a year had passed since Yuri had reincarnated in this world. The order in the forest, once considered a deadly place, had changed beyond recognition. Animals began to avoid his settlement, and when the Luca, the former masters of these lands, disappeared, other monsters rushed to the plains, separating the thicket from the other villages. As a result, these lands became even more inaccessible to humans, and the protagonist's home remained a secret, hidden from prying eyes, until one day something happened. The protagonist was gathering firewood, skillfully chopping it with his sword. The 5th year of his life in another world had begun. Having smashed a whole bunch of fuel resources, he said, "I think that's enough for today." Marcia, pointing at his weapon, remarked, "It's incredibly sharp." He replied, "It's all because the blade is forged with earth magic. The more mana he pours into the steel, the more powerfully it cuts." Okay, now it's time for lunch. While preparing the food, MC thought about how many things he'd created over the years. A meat ferment called almost soy sauce. It had such a wonderful aroma. He said it out loud and Marcia objected, but she wasn't thrilled. Spirit sipped from her cup and exclaimed, "A heady drink made from wild apples called cider. Now that's just to her taste." Yuri thought, he can't have that. He also created useful household utensils and unprecedented vegetables. But his greatest creation was the wall he used to enclose the settlement. Stretching for a good kilometer in radius, it acquired colossal power. With its stern grandeur, this barrier resembled an impregnable citadel. Until now, this strange colossus, hidden in the forest, had never been seen by anyone. This had continued for years, but today, Odell and his granddaughter Donna came upon the protagonist's settlement. They had escaped the monsters that had been pursuing them, and now they were praising the heavens for their survival. It was then that they saw the mighty wall. Odell exclaimed in amazement, "What kind of marvel is this? Where did this come from? Who could have erected something like this?" Donna looked at her grandfather in confusion and asked him, hadn't he been in these parts many years ago? Perhaps a new settlement had sprung up here in the meantime? The old man touched the wall and, amazed, noted how remarkably skillful the workmanship was. Such monumental work required incredible resources and effort. There was probably an outpost of some formidable power in front of them. Donna asked in alarm, "So, invaders have invaded their lands?" Odell replied that they couldn't ignore it. They needed to get back quickly and report their findings. His granddaughter agreed. At that moment, the protagonist spotted them from the observation deck and exclaimed in surprise, "What is this?" Odell and Donna stared at him in amazement. The protagonist's detection skill kicked in, and he decided to check the situation, but he never expected to encounter people. Odell was confused. Is this a child? Could anyone really dare raise children in such a dangerous forest? MC wondered what to do. What if it got to the point where they started complaining like, "He built this place. He's suspicious. He needs to burn it." The elder thought, if this boy calls the adults, they'll be in trouble. What should they do? They both instantly made a decision, come what may, and bowed to each other, simultaneously asking for forgiveness and mercy. After that, they looked at each other in surprise. Yuri opened the gate for them, apologized, and said he hadn't expected to find people here. That's why he was confused. Odell said no, they had jumped to conclusions too, and were asking for his forgiveness. Donna remarked that she hadn't thought anyone lived in this forest. It was good that they understood each other. The protagonist thought he was afraid that if the locals attacked, he would have to fight. But these two didn't look like aggressors at all. But what were their intentions? They seemed confused too. He needed to find out everything. He asked if they had some business here. Odell answered him no, their presence here was a coincidence. They were from the village of End, which was nearby. The protagonist clarified, End village? The old man confirmed this, holding out his hand, holding a piece of fruit, and said they were looking for food. But monsters chased them, and they barely escaped. MC said, that's it, he understood the situation. Opening the gate wider, he invited them inside, noting that it was improper to talk on the threshold. Let them come inside. The uninvited guests were confused, but agreed to his offer. Yuri thought this way he would be sure they wouldn't run for help. And perhaps this was a chance to get some information. Donna whispered to her grandfather, is he sure? They could be killed. He told her that refusal wouldn't change anything, and so there was a chance to negotiate and stay alive. Odell looked around and told her, however, it was eerily quiet here, not a soul. The buildings were completely uninhabitable, and yet the fields were meticulously tended. What did that mean? He asked the protagonist if he could talk to the adults. The protagonist answered him in surprise, there aren't any, he lives here alone. The elder and his granddaughter were completely amazed. The old man exclaimed in confusion, what's this? It can't be. It's impossible to survive alone in such a dangerous forest. Is a child really capable of monitoring such an area on his own? MC replied, they may or may not believe it, but it's true. The old man didn't let up, declaring in bewilderment, there must be someone who built this wall. Yuri said he built it with earth magic. Odell couldn't believe it. What was he even saying? The protagonist couldn't understand why they had such a reaction to a wall that even he could build, although he thought he understood. Children aren't usually good at this kind of work. Adults usually do it in groups to speed things up. He said out loud that he was alone, so he had to do it alone. It took a lot of time and effort. He didn't mention that. In fact, it took 10 whole days. Donna thought with confusion. He seemed younger than her, and yet he had already been through so much. Odell noted that the boy was talented and persistent. He had probably worked for many years to achieve this result. What a patient child. He asked him, but why was he alone in such a place? The protagonist thought, this is it, the question. He expected to be asked this when he met someone, so he had already come up with a backstory. He said out loud that he actually didn't know where he was born. For as long as he could remember, he and his grandfather had been nomads, living from day to day. About 5 years ago, they found this abandoned village and settled because it offered shelter from the bad weather. One day, his grandfather went off to gather supplies and never returned. Something must have happened to him along the way, but he believed that he would return someday and was waiting for him here. He felt awkward lying, and he was worried whether they believed him. To his surprise, the guests burst into tears. Donna, wiping away tears, apologized to him for reminding him of the past. Odell, wiping moisture from his eyes, remarked on how loyal he was. MC felt ashamed. They seemed like good people, and he even felt a little awkward. The old man asked him if these beautiful fields were also the work of his grandfather. Yuri answered yes. He now tends them, using the farming skills he taught him. The elder asked him with interest if he could take a closer look. The protagonist answered, of course. The old man crouched before the plants and said in amazement, amazing, the leaves are so lush, and this soil, it's rare to find such high-quality soil. The protagonist asked him if he was a farmer too. Odell replied that he was. Their village relies on agriculture for its livelihood, but in recent years, there have been crop failures across the country. Their village, too, is on the brink of famine, so they risk their lives to search for food. MC wondered, confused, what was going on outside. The old man asked him if he could handle such a large harvest on his own. Could he? Yuri assured him he was managing, but there was still some left. Odell continued sheepishly, well, he has a proposition. The protagonist remarked, they want to ask for the harvest, right? The elder replied, that too. Of course, it wasn't for free, but he had one more request. He'd been farming for a long time, so he knew his way around. The land and harvest here far surpassed what they had in their village. This was probably the result of his skill, developed beyond his years. Could he please come to the village and help them with his skills? The protagonist exclaimed in surprise. What did he say? When the guests entered his house, he told them to take off their shoes at the threshold and then enter. The old man, fulfilling his request, remarked, Take off your shoes? How strange. The MC pointed to a bench where they could sit, in front of which lay a tanned bearskin. Odell remarked how fine the fur was. The inside of the room was also clean. Yuri asked the guests if they wanted anything to drink. Unfortunately, he only had water. The elder declined, but Donna happily agreed, saying just what they needed. They'd been running from monsters, so their throats were completely dry. The guests drank the water, and the old man remarked on the beautiful dishes. Afterward, he thanked the protagonist for their hospitality and introduced his granddaughter, telling him his name. The protagonist replied with his own, and Donna exclaimed, "Nice to meet you." MC was embarrassed. He hadn't expected the conversation to take such a turn. He reciprocated her feelings and thought, the village of End? He hadn't planned to go there, but he was ready to listen to these people and offer them advice. He wondered out loud if the harvest in the village was that bad. To be honest, he had no idea what was happening in the outside world. Odell replied that for a man living in seclusion, that was normal. The problem is that there's a food shortage throughout the country. Yuri asked, confused. The whole country? The old man replied that the country consisted of several cities and numerous villages. The cities thrive primarily on trade and industry. The villages survive by selling their harvests to the cities through merchants. But due to wars with other countries and monster attacks, the fields fell into disrepair. Supplies to the cities were significantly reduced. This affected all the villages. Their settlement had been providing food to the townspeople until the end, but their fields were losing crops year after year. Therefore, they were forced to risk their lives searching for food. The protagonist considered this, but why don't they take up hunting? Perhaps there were ideological or religious reasons, but it was better not to ask. He wondered out loud what exactly they grew in their village. Odell said they'd been growing root vegetables and wheat for ages. The protagonist asked, puzzled, "Is that all?" The elder looked at him, confused, and asked what he meant. MC replied that he meant, for example, legumes, like soybeans. He'd seen them growing wild here. The old man exclaimed in amazement, "Soybeans? They're poisonous after all." Yuri was taken aback by his answer and asked permission to examine what they'd gathered. Having received permission, he unpacked his bag and noted that he'd thought there'd be more edible items, although there should be quite a lot of stuff in the forest. Just berries and fruits. Acorns, or rather, dagu nuts. Don't they eat them? Donna answered him in surprise. What a strange question. They're bitter, they give you a stomachache, so they're not fit for consumption. Everything became clear to the protagonist. These people are very conservative and seem to be very afraid of poisoning. Based on past experience, they didn't try to eat anything considered inedible, and that makes sense. In a world full of monsters, it's best not to take risks unless absolutely necessary. But if they don't change their approach, the village will be destroyed. Now that he's learned of the situation, he'll have to help them. He told them he'd be right back and left. After a while, the protagonist brought a bowl and offered the guests a taste. Odell scooped up some food with a spoon and asked in surprise, "What is this?" He'd never seen anything like it. Donna exclaimed, "Judging by the aroma, is this really maple nectar? What a rare luxury." When they tried it, a whole range of positive emotions flashed across their faces. They began to devour it with pleasure. Odell delightedly exclaimed, "What a wonderful dish. Crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, and so elastic he's been chewing it for years." Donna squealed with delight. "It's delicious." MC told him it was starch dango. He made it by extracting the starch from the dagu fruit and other ingredients. The elder remarked in surprise, "Starch?" Yuri showed them starch powder and added that when it's mixed with water and salt and then fried, this dish is created. To obtain this powder, you need to grind starch-rich plants, then wrap them in cloth and rinse them with water. The fine starch will seep through the cloth and settle to the bottom. You need to drain the top layer of water, rinse again, and repeat the process until the sediment turns white. Then you dry it all, and that's how the powder is created. The old man exclaimed in amazement, "Unbelievable. And this is made from bitter dagu fruits?" It's not the sweetness of the nectar. The fruits themselves aren't bitter at all. In fact, they're slightly sweet. The protagonist replied that if you soak them in water to remove the bitterness, they become very tasty. Odell marveled. Wow, how did he know all this? He replied to the elder, "It's all thanks to his grandfather's teachings." He thought, a fictional grandfather, that's convenient. Odell resolutely told him he must come to the village. Donna picked up on it. His knowledge would be very useful. The protagonist thought hopelessly, well, he's done it. Now he can't get away with it. They're pressing him so hard. To be honest, he himself is interested in seeing how these people live. Besides, his knowledge of the local realities will come in handy in the future. Caution is good, of course, but one shouldn't completely distrust people. He looked at them and said, "Okay, he'll try to help them." A while later, when he was seeing his guests off, he said to Marcia, "So when the harvest is finished in the fields, they'll go to the village of End." She looked at him in surprise and asked, "Will he be back soon?" He looked surprised, and that's it? So she's not going? The spirit answered, "Please forgive me." She'd already told him few people would recognize her. They'd probably consider her a pest again. She'd wait for him here. Just let him leave her some food. Confused, MC said, "Okay, but can she open the lids of wine or potions herself?" Marcia replied that he didn't have to worry about that. She could extract the contents with magic. After all, she was the spirit of wine. Yuri was confused. She can do that? Then why did she ask him to do it? The spirit laughed and said, "Of course, it's nicer when someone pours for her." He nearly choked with indignation. How cunning she was. And so about 3 months had passed since the promise to go to the village of End by the end of summer. One day there was a knock at the gate. When the protagonist emerged, he saw his new allies, behind whom were people in a cart. Odell greeted him joyfully. Donna was also happy to see him, noting that they hadn't seen each other in a while. The driver looked around fearfully. The protagonist asked them if they had gotten here without any problems. The elder answered that it was true, thanks to the monster-repelling amulet he'd given him. It contained scented balls made from the excrement of the lucca bird. MC said it was ready, they could leave. The old man asked him where the harvest he wanted to give to the village was. Yuri showed him the magic bag, and told him not to worry, it was all right there inside. Odell and Donna exclaimed in surprise, "What? How could so much fit in there? What kind of bag is that? He even has something like that." Sitting in the cart, he told them he'd grabbed a few more things, the rest he'd get in the village. Potatoes lay at the bottom of the cart. He pointed to the bag, which surprised them, and said it belonged to his grandfather. He thought he'd done the right thing, repairing this magical object he'd found in another abandoned village. Thanks to that, he didn't have to show them his storage magic. He intended to keep his special skills and magic a secret. Odell turned to him and said, "By the way, could he tell me how he cooks soybeans?" The protagonist remarked, and indeed, they hadn't had time to discuss this last time. "It's simple. Just heat them at 100 degrees for 5 to 10 minutes. There are different methods, but the fastest is heating." The old man was surprised. Is that all? He thought they shouldn't be eaten because his ancestors said so. But it turned out to be so simple. The protagonist assured him that legumes were wonderful plants. He thought the most important thing in agriculture was nitrogen. Crop yield and growth depend largely on the nitrogen content of the soil. Legumes absorb nitrogen from the atmosphere thanks to bacteria living in their roots. The nitrogen absorbed by the legumes can restore soil fertility if the remains of the crop are incorporated into the soil, like a natural fertilizer. It's unlikely they'll understand anything. He pulled out a bean pod and said, "So let's try incorporating legumes into the crop rotation. If they bury the leaves, stems, or unripe fruit into the soil after harvesting, even depleted land will improve." He does this every year. His grandfather taught him that. Donna asked him who his relative was. Odell thoughtfully expressed hope that all was well with him. When he returned, he thought it would be a good idea to leave someone from their village behind so he would know his grandson was safe. MC smiled and countered, "Don't worry about it." He'd left him a note. He couldn't tell them his grandfather didn't exist anymore. After a while, Donna exclaimed, "Here she is." The girl turned to the protagonist and said, "Welcome to their village." He spoke in amazement. He thought it would be about the same size as his village, but it was much larger and livelier than he expected. Indeed, people were bustling about everywhere. Workers were working. Everyone congratulated the elder on his return and asked, pointing at the protagonist, "Is this the same Yuri? Let him introduce them." The villagers told MC how wonderful it was that he had arrived. He really lived in that dangerous forest. Yuri was embarrassed. There was too much attention on him. He asked Donna if they could go straight to the field. The girl laughed and told him to take his time. Odell remarked that since he was already there, he could play with the village children. The protagonist firmly refused. When they arrived at the field, the protagonist looked at the soil and the weak grass and said, "So that's it. The earth really does seem weakened. It's not just the depleted soil that's causing it, but also the low concentration of magical elements." The elder said sadly, "That's exactly it. Everything grows much better in soil with a high concentration of magical elements." A man standing nearby added, "But such places attract monsters, so they have to live on depleted soil." MC considered using wood magic, but the villagers didn't seem to have it, and if it was a temporary solution, it was pointless. Besides, magical elements should only be a factor in promoting crop growth. In that case, systematically improving the environment is the most reliable and fastest way. He said out loud that on the way here, he had seen several useful wild plants, but they weren't used here. He would teach them how to use them. There were ways to make the land fertile without magical elements, but that would require changing existing customs. He looked at all the assembled villagers and asked if they were ready for this. Odell exclaimed, "Of course." A man standing nearby added, "That's exactly why they called him. Then they can get to work right away." All the villagers joyfully raised their hands, overjoyed at the prospect of improving their situation. Thus began the revival of the village of End. He showed the locals the soybean seeds from last year's harvest, and told them that, in all fairness, they should have planted them a month ago, but that there was still time. They needed to get to work on the field quickly to breathe new life into it. The villagers happily supported him. After some time, they began planting together. The protagonist said that in about a week, the first shoots would appear. To prevent the soil from depleting, they should plant soybeans in this field again only after 3 years. It was much more efficient to manage 3 plots, rotating the crops each year. The villagers were completely amazed, and he was wise beyond his years. He sheepishly asked them if perhaps they should also plant ricola, the tubers from which starch is extracted. He was referring to the earthly equivalent of the flower Lycoris radiata. The people were perplexed as to what kind of starch this was. One of the villagers exclaimed, "Isn't this the very ingredient for dango that Odell mentioned? But ricola tubers are highly poisonous." The protagonist reassured them, with careful removal of the poison, there wouldn't be any problems. The man said he still couldn't imagine this dango, The elder had described it as something akin to a slime that resisted being eaten. MC thought to himself, an unpleasant comparison. Taking out the prepared dish, he told the villagers he'd brought some, so they could try it. Their trust was understandable, but he guaranteed safety. When the villagers tried it, they were absolutely delighted, exclaiming, "It's so delicious." Odell and Donna watched their compatriots with smiles. The villagers were amazed. It was incredible that such a thing could come from such a poisonous plant. Yuri remarked that this plant would be useful to plant along the edges of the fields. They said that thanks to its poison, it protects crops from underground pests. Moreover, it reproduces on its own, making maintenance easier. The villagers supported his proposal and were ready to begin planting immediately. The protagonist warned them to remember to wash their hands thoroughly after handling the plant. He thought the village's food situation should improve slightly now. Although he was a little nervous at first, coming here was a good decision. The next morning, the protagonist woke up, stretched sweetly, and thanked Donna for the soft bed, adding that he had slept well. The girl told him he must have been very tired yesterday. She was surprised that he had accomplished so much in just one day. He responded with a smile, because good deeds don't wait. Donna, leaving the house, added that yesterday had been a hectic day, so she decided to throw a welcoming party today, and he should follow her. Yuri was surprised. What, this very morning? She led him to a set table, where the villagers were seated, and exclaimed, "He's hungry, right? Let him eat as much as he can." The girl continued sheepishly, "It's rather modest for a welcoming party." The protagonist, looking at the table in surprise, said, "No, that's enough. So much for him." Seeing one of the dishes, he asked in confusion, "Is that meat?" He thought they didn't eat that. "What kind of meat was this?" Donna told him, "It's from the emir. This animal is common cattle in the world, whose wool is highly prized at market. In their village, these animals are raised like cattle." He said in surprise, he saw them yesterday. They were very cute. The girl said, "Meat is a real treasure for them. They cherish it and eat it only on special occasions." The protagonist, confused, thought, they prepared this especially for him. Donna continued introducing him to the dishes. She said, "This soup is made from dried meat, preserved for long-term storage." He said, "Then, let us begin the meal." He thought, they say goat meat has a distinctive aroma. After tasting the soup, he exclaimed in surprise, "Delicious, and no smell at all." Odell noted with a smile that they soak it in alcohol beforehand. This suppresses the odor and makes the meat more tender. MC thought, "I see." He didn't know alcohol was so powerful. Later, he tried to negotiate for some for cooking. Marcia would be happy too. Yuri said they said meat was precious, but they only eat goat here. Hunting monsters could provide an additional source of food. The elder replied that they would do so if they could, but they have neither the appropriate weapons nor people skilled enough in combat. Sometimes, they fight off monsters that attack the village, but that's the best they can do. The protagonist, still clueless, thought that even the locals, who were surely stronger than him, were having a hard time fighting back. Perhaps they were dragons or something like that. What if such a monster attacked him? He asked, "Can't they hire someone who knows how to fight?" Donna said, confused, "Wealthy settlements can hire adventurers, but their village can't afford it." One of the villagers added that strong fighters are expensive. The girl said, "But sometimes adventurers stop in the village for the night." Odell said that at such times, if a monster appears, they come to their aid. At that moment, a loud gong sounded. Everyone became alarmed, and the protagonist exclaimed in confusion, "What is it?" Donna answered him, "It's a signal of a monster's approach." A lookout shouted from the tower, "Close the gates, women and children. Go home. Everyone who can hold a weapon to the gates." The girl called MC to follow her. He thought, it's obvious they're used to this. "What kind of monster is this?" One of the villagers asked the lookout who's there. The guard replied, "A single monocorn. Although, what else is behind him?" When the villagers took a closer look, they joyfully exclaimed, "It's a trade caravan. These are the footsteps of fortune." Yuri asked in confusion, "A trade caravan? Will they be okay?" Donna smiled and told him not to worry. Trade caravans always have adventurers as guards. They were the group that had saved their village many times. These were the footsteps of fortune. The protagonist was surprised. A real band of adventurers. He wanted to see them. If he climbed the watchtower, maybe he'd see the battle. Donna shouted to him that the children were running this way. He tried to stop them. Koodle and his squad approached the monster. The commander said it was a monocorn bear. The villagers couldn't handle it. They arrived just in time. He hadn't called their squad the Steps of Fortune for nothing. He shouted to his squad, "They need to finish this enemy off in one fell swoop. Let them cover him." Dahlia drew her arrow and activated Shadow Lock, attacking the enemy. Then she shouted to Cuddle, "Now the bear won't be able to move." The squad's healer, Katra, magically strengthened the bodies of her comrades as they rushed at the grizzly. Cuddle shouted to the enemy, "Now he'll get it," and successfully attacked it. Sometime later, when the adventurers loaded the bear's carcass onto the wagon, Odell told the commander, "Brilliant work, as always." Kudal replied, "They haven't seen each other for a year. It's good to see everyone in good health." He looked at MC and noticed with surprise, an unfamiliar face? The elder placed his hand on the protagonist's shoulder and said, "This boy's name is Yuri. Let him imagine, this child living alone in that very forest. Cuddle exclaimed in bewilderment. It can't be true. He lives alone in those dangerous lands? It wasn't that he doubted the words of the respected man, but it was hard to believe. The protagonist thought in bewilderment. Dangerous lands? He noticed the squad leader's intense gaze and wondered with confusion. Were they really suspecting him of something? Well, that was understandable. A child living alone in the forest seemed extremely unnatural. Now he needed to act casually, praise them, and establish rapport. MC delightedly told the commander, they defeated the monster so quickly. Adventurers really are very strong. He had to expend a lot of effort to defeat such an opponent. Professionals work quite differently. Cuddle, confused, asked him again. He defeated the monster? Yuri laughed as he replied, well, he'd been attacked by a bear once too. It was twice this size, but if he'd managed to defeat it, it must have been weakened. The commander was even more surprised, twice as surprised. Did he even know it was a monster called a gambit grizzly? Even they fight tooth and nail against an opponent like that. And he's telling me he killed it all by himself? The protagonist thought, confused. Maybe he'd said the wrong thing. Seeing his confused expression, Cuddle suddenly burst into laughter and said, what an imagination he has. He hoped he'd actually be able to defeat an opponent like that someday. The protagonist, in turn, was also surprised. He didn't believe him? The commander, laughing, continued, he used to say he'd taken down a dragon as a kid. Fry laughed as he told the commander, he's still quite the braggart. Cuddle answered him, no, that's not what he meant. At that moment, Adon, astonished, asked the MC if his words were true. Yuri was surprised. Who the hell was this? The man became embarrassed, apologized for his impudence, and said his name was Adon, and he was the manager of this trade caravan. He pointed at the adventurers and continued, and these were their guards. A group of adventurers called the Strides of Fortune. Cuddle, in turn, told him his name, adding that he was the commander of his group. Adon told the protagonist, by the way, about that grisly gambit. Since he had obtained it, did he have any materials from it? Cuddle told him not to take childish tales seriously. The protagonist took out his magic bag, pulled out a bone, and said, there's almost no skin or meat left, but there are bones and such. Both the manager and Cuddle stared at this in confusion. Adon took the bone, examined it, and exclaimed in surprise, this size, this density, this smell, it's definitely genuine. The commander, unable to believe his eyes, exclaimed in amazement, it can't be. Did he really kill it? Adon told him that it didn't matter now. What mattered was that this valuable material was right in front of them. He asked MC if he'd sell it to him, basically. Yuri, confused, said, well, maybe, although he'd actually wanted to make soup out of it or bury it in the garden for fertilizer. The manager, not hiding his emotions, exclaimed in surprise, what is he even talking about? The bones of this monster are rare and in high demand. Just one piece is worth a whole gold coin. The protagonist was confused. What? One gold coin in this world is worth about 100,000 yen. He never would have thought it was so valuable. Incidentally, he doesn't even know the name of the country he lives in now. He has no life experience whatsoever, and this is a great opportunity. He'll learn about prices and get rid of excess junk by selling it to a merchant. With these thoughts in mind, he reached into his bag again and said, he has that too. The protagonist pulled out a dried bear gallbladder, which had medicinal properties, and was used as an ingredient in expensive potions. Idadon seemed about to choke with surprise. He exclaimed in delight and amazement, what? He's never seen such a huge amount of bear bile. Let him sell it to him. For this, he'll get 3 gold coins. MC reached into his bag again, and the merchant, almost losing consciousness, asked in confusion, he has anything else? In the end, he took practically everything in Yuri's magical bag. After that, he sat down warily next to the cart and said, he bought everything. The merchant's gambling spirit flared within him. Cuddle asked him if he had enough cash. The protagonist, surprised, clarified, he doesn't have any money. Adon replied, please forgive me. All his savings are kept in the merchant guild's safe. Couldn't he go with them? Confused, the protagonist asked. To the city? The merchant told him he would cover his return carriage ride, accommodations, and food. What would he say to that? MC thought hard, then replied, why not? He looked questioningly at Odell. The elder replied that he and Adon had known each other for a long time, that he was a reliable man, so everything would be fine. Donna winked at Yuri and added that she hadn't been there either, but they said the city was an amazing place. Once he got the money, he could buy a ton of things there that couldn't be found here. The protagonist thought, that's right, if he simply took a bag of gold, there would be nothing to spend it on here, and it would just sit, as they say, like dead weight in the vault. Life in the forest suited him just fine, but he had other aspirations. Besides, he really wanted to see a city in this other world with his own eyes. He shook the merchant's hand and told him he agreed to go. Let them take him with them to the city. After a while, the caravan set off. The protagonist peered out of the wagon with delight. He thought of the adventurer band, the Steps of Fortune, Cuddle, Dahlia, Katra, Frey, and Orban, true heroes. And along with Adon, Odell, Donna, and Marcia, they were now his allies. Finally, the merchant said, the Kingdom of Rivaline. MC thought, so that's the name of this state? Adon continued, their route lay to Lorenzen, the kingdom's main trading center. Yuri asked him if it was the largest in the country then. The merchant replied, the second largest city after the capital. Donna, who had gone with him, asked him if he was happy, right? The protagonist smiled sheepishly and said, well, yes, he was looking forward to it with interest. He hadn't thought she'd come with them, but Odell said she'd never been to a big city before, so it would be good for her to see the world too. That's what he said. But in reality, the elder simply couldn't stand her pressure. She'd begged him. She wanted to go too. But since the adventurers were with them, there was nothing to worry about. Suddenly, he became wary. His detection skill detected monster activity. He realized there were only 7 of them, and they were approaching, encircling them. Such a tactic is typical of wild dogs or wolves. The protagonist said out loud, it seemed their caravan had become a target for the monsters. Cuddle asked him in surprise, what was he talking about? If that were true, his scouts would have given the signal by now. At that moment, Fry jumped onto the roof of the wagon. The commander asked him what was going on. The warrior said it looked like monsters were targeting them. Cuddle thought in confusion about the MC. He'd spotted them before the beastman with his keen senses, and he'd detected the threat from inside the carriage? Who the hell was this boy? Fry cursed and told the commander that things were bad. Judging by the smell, they were grid wolves. Kuddle was surprised. What? How many were there? Fry counted 7. The commander remarked, this is going to be tough. Yuri apologized and asked him what these monsters were. The boy answered that they were wolf-type creatures, twice the size of a normal wolf and 10 times stronger. They were terrifying creatures that surrounded and cornered their prey in packs. They usually didn't attack caravans, but they must have sensed the child inside and decided he was easy prey. Anyway, they'll figure something out. Neither he nor Donna should go outside under any circumstances. The girl told her ally that everything would be fine, although it was clear she was panicking. She added that the adventurer group would definitely handle it. The protagonist agreed with her and thought, judging by Cuddle's reaction, could they really be that dangerous? If the adventurers were harmed, he'd blame himself for the rest of the journey. Since they were attacked because of him, he was responsible, and he simply had to help. But there was a problem he'd realized back in N Village. Mastering elemental magic was considered an anomaly in this world. It wasn't that he didn't trust Donna and the others, but rumors had a way of spreading quickly. He could be called a monster's child, a heretic, or even executed. There were probably soldiers in town, and if they learned of his magic, they would do just that. There was only one way out. He simply had to avoid the battle itself. Donna, watching him, thought he was scared. It must be hard for him to survive in the forest too. MC, however, was thinking about something completely different. Before the battle began, he'd scare the monsters into leaving. Yuri concentrated on detecting his target. After that, he realized one blow would be enough. The weak point of dogs and wolves is the tip of the nose, where all the nerve endings are concentrated. A sudden blow to a vulnerable spot would send them fleeing in panic. So he activated the water hammer and set his plan in motion. The monsters took fright, began to thrash about in panic, and eventually fled into the depths of the forest. Kuddle exclaimed in bewilderment, what happened? Fry was also puzzled. Why did they run away? Katra chuckled thoughtfully. The commander asked her, what's wrong? The girl answered, she had sensed magic. Most likely, that child, the boy, had driven off these enemies. Orban said in amazement, really? Even they hadn't seen them. Dahlia remarked, how could they do such a thing while sitting in a van? Cuddle mused, no, that makes sense. The boy had lived in that forest all alone for many years. Luck alone clearly wasn't enough. But if he had such incredible strength, then his story about the grisly gambit was also true. Katra said they had to do something before it was too late. The commander agreed with her. Yuri couldn't be left unattended. Meanwhile, the protagonist was thinking, good thing it worked. Cuddle told his comrades he'd handle it himself, but for now, they needed to continue on their way.